Okay, well, good evening. This is Chair Bob Jorgensen, and I would like to call this regular meeting of the Planning Commission for September 22nd, 2021 to order. Deputy City Clerk Kevin Christian, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Dondekar.
Here.
Commissioner Hopkins.
Here.
Commissioner Khan.
Here.
Commissioner Shoresman.
Here.
Commissioner Wolkin.
Here.
Vice Chair Quincy.
Here.
Chair Jorgensen.
Here. Thank you. So let the record reflect that commissioners are present through teleconferencing. I'd like to remind my fellow commissioners and staff to help us reduce background noise by muting your phone or microphone unless you are speaking. And an example of the need for that will be coming up right away with a Pledge of Allegiance, because we'll ask one person to lead it so that we don't all create echoes. So Commissioner Wolkin, would you lead the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I would be happy to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is public comment. At this time, we'll hear any public comment for items that are not on tonight's agenda. Items raised are generally referred to staff, and if action by the commission is necessary, it may be scheduled for a future meeting. There's instructions on the screen, and once comment is open, your microphone will be unmuted. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Deputy City Clerk, do we have anyone who wishes to make a public comment?
I'm not seeing any hands yet. Let me just go over the instructions quickly in case anybody needed them verbally. There's on your Zoom control panel, depending on your version, there is a more option where you should be able to find a hand. If there isn't one already directly on your control panel, you just go ahead and raise your hand and I will call you to speak. Seeing none, Chair Jorgensen.
Okay, then we'll move to the consent agenda, and the only item there is consideration of the minutes of September 8th. Do we have any comments on the minutes? Are we ready for a motion to approve?
Commissioner Chair Jorgensen, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of September 8th as they stand.
And I, Commissioner Khan, will second that.
Perfect. Perfect. Good. So let's go ahead and have the roll call then, please.
Commissioner Dondekar.
Here.
Yay. Commissioner Khan.
Yes.
Commissioner Hopkins.
Yes.
Commissioner Shoresman.
Yes.
Commissioner Wolkin.
Yes.
Vice Chair Quincy.
Yes.
Chair Jorgensen.
Yes. Thank you. So the minutes of September 8th are approved. So the next item is public hearings. And I want to say generally that any court challenge to the action taken on public hearing items on this agenda may be limited to considering only those issues raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the City of San Luis Obispo at or prior to the public hearing. If you wish to speak, please give your name and address for the record. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. So the first item tonight is 175 Venture Drive, a review of the proposed design and layout for a phased medium density residential component of the Avalon Ranch Development Project. Commissioner Hopkins, did you have a statement to make?
Yes, I will be recusing myself from this item as I have a conflict of interest through my employer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll see you later then. So I think we're ready then with the with this first item 4A, and this is going to be presented by John Rickenback, the contract planner. John, are you ready to begin?
I believe so. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The one thing I would ask is that the PowerPoint presentation be put up on the screen, Kevin, if you could do that? Or would you rather have me share mine? Either way.
If you're able to share yours, that would be my preference. But if you would like my assistance, I can go ahead.
Let's see if I can do this.
All right.
All right, let's try this. Okay. How does that look right there? Got it?
Looks good. We can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, so tonight, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. Tonight, I'm going to be presenting a piece of the Avalon Ranch project. Tonight, you're going to be looking at the review of the R2 component of the project. Part of what I want to do is give you a little context of what you're actually trying to do, because it could be a bit confusing. And I know you read the staff report, and hopefully that was clear enough. But I'll walk you through some steps so you can frame questions or frame your consideration of the project that's at hand today. We do have an applicant team of Wathan Castanos Homes led by Carol Florence and Reed Oñate, and they have a whole team who are prepared to present the project in more detail than I will. I'll tend to go over the regulatory aspects of it. First, I want to start with the recommendation. This is actually a little longer than what's in your staff report, but the recommendation would be to adopt the resolution approving proposed site design and layout for the R2 component of the Avalon Ranch project, which would be developed in phases 1 through 3 under the development plan. They've also asked for a fence height exception adjacent to an industrial area. We recommend approval of that based on findings and subject to conditions of approval. There are some conditions, but here I also wanted to make a point that the project would be subject to other conditions that were part of the original approval of the Avalon Ranch project back in 2017, including mitigation measures that were included in the project EIR at that time. So let's go back in time a little bit. The Avalon Ranch project was approved back in 2017. That included a lot of components: a development plan, a development agreement, which is essentially a contract between the city and the developer, where the developer will get to do certain things. The city gets a lot of benefits as well in terms of public infrastructure primarily. There was a vesting tentative tract map. There's a certified final EIR. Overall, the project at that time was found to be consistent with city policies, including the general plan, the airport area specific plan, community design guidelines. That's important because what you're hearing tonight has already been found consistent with the general plan and airport area specific plan and community design guidelines. What you're looking at tonight is a focus on the design itself of the R2 component, which we didn't have the details at the time the project was approved. We had a map and we had a development plan, but now we actually have design criteria and actually pictures you can see and setbacks, building heights, and so forth. This has been to the Architectural Review Commission. I'll get to that in a little bit. A little context on where we're looking at. This is within the airport area specific plan. It's the southwestern component of it. It's all part of that specific plan, and it's the Avalon Ranch area. And specifically, we're looking at the R2 component within that, which is mostly the western part that's on the west side of the creek that bisects the site. Covers roughly 27 acres of the 150-acre site. R2 product would be developed within 3 different phases in the project, 297 homes total. And currently, phase 1 is under review. There's 179 homes and quite a bit of detail. The detail you're going to see is first going to be applied to phase 1. There'd be 118 additional homes in phases 2 and 3, but we're not quite there yet. So this map, just so you see, is really a conceptual map that there are purple areas on this, which include roadways, creeks, even park areas that are not shown. And here, sort of in response to one of the agenda correspondence items, we're not really looking at parks per se. Those were approved as part of the original project back in 2017. What we're looking at is the housing component and how that indirectly would relate to the rest of the project, parks being a component of that. So let's talk about the R2 products. There's really 2 types of products in here, but within that, there's a myriad of styles, sizes. There's a lot of mixing and matching that can be done. The two basic types of units are the cluster units. There are 6 floor plans ranging in size from 1,600 to about 2,200 square feet. All of these would have 3 bedrooms, most 2.5 baths. Most have a 2-car garage. Some smaller units would have a 1-car garage. And that includes 131 of the 179 units in phase 1. The pocket cottage units are generally smaller. There are 5 floor plans there, ranging in size from as small as 819 square feet to a little over 1,700 square feet, 48 units of that type in the first phase, 13 of which are 819 square feet. So there are some very smaller units. And just for the record, that's actually a smaller unit than was originally envisioned in the development plan. The applicants worked with staff to actually help get smaller units in there that would be more affordable. So that's something that they worked hard on, and we've worked hard with them to achieve that. Most of these are 3-bedroom, 2.5 baths, though some are a bit smaller, 2-bedroom, 1 bath. Most have a 1-car garage. I don't want to say more about these yet because I know that's a lot of the applicant's presentation to show you some of these details. But I will show you just very basically, there are 5 architectural styles. We went over this in great detail with the ARC, all 5 styles could be applied to the cluster units. 3 of the styles would be applied to the pocket cottage unit, Spanish bungalow and farmhouse styles. And then here, don't want to get into the weeds on this, but I want to show you through this matrix how many different ways permutations of housing you could have. There's 2 different kinds of units, cluster and pocket cottage. There's 6 different plans of cluster, 5 of pocket cottage. There's 5 different kinds of architecture. And when you apply that, you could really do quite a few mixing and matching. Now, this is consistent with the idea behind the development plan, which asked for this. And we'll get to one provision of this that we discussed in some length at ARC in a bit. But just to illustrate, there's quite a few different styles. A couple of renderings just to show you what this would look like. I don't want to linger on these because I know the applicant team has this and others, which they can describe a little more detail how this relates to their design. But there are paseos through the site. I know we had some questions about paseos and pedestrian connectivity generally, and I know the applicant's prepared to speak to that in more detail. There's also a fence height exception request that goes with this. There's a specific reason for it too. Now, under the municipal code, you can have a maximum wall fence height up to 6 feet along the rear and side setbacks. You can do that up to 9 feet if you combine that with a retaining wall. Now, there are exceptions allowed that if it relates to topography or privacy. And in this case, that's exactly the issue. It's to protect the privacy of some residential uses adjacent to an existing industrial property that would be generally west on the north side of the area. It would allow for a 6-foot-high solid fence on top of a previously approved retaining wall. So that would allow a combination that could be anywhere from 9 to 13 feet high. And this is part of the applicant's packet. And I just wanted to show this without getting into a lot of depth to show what the concept is. These 3 pictures on the left are probably the most useful. The the parking with the industrial area is elevated a bit over where the residential would be. So it's already up in the air a bit, and there's a retaining wall. So when you're asking for this building, when they're asking for this building height, quite a bit of that is because the residential side is much lower. And so that higher wall would be on the residential side and necessary to actually block the views to and from the industrial parking area. I'll leave it at that for a moment. You may have questions about that later, but that's the idea. Let's talk about what ARC said. The ARC met about a month ago, and in general, they recommended approval unanimously, but in general, they had a few comments, which we carried forward in the agenda report. First, they felt that the contemporary architecture, as shown, should be a bit more graceful. They didn't quite define that, but to have the massing match other styles more effectively. The applicants have addressed that. I'll explain that in a minute. They also recommended some flexibility in implementing one of the development plan standards, such that the predominant architectural style within an identified neighborhood could be anywhere from 40 to 60% of the units in that neighborhood, rather than the 60% prescribed. And just to give you in English what that means, in the development plan, there was a provision in there that tried to have a lot of diversity in styles, architectural styles. And within defined neighborhoods, as shown in the development plan, it actually called for a predominant style that was 60% or more within that neighborhood. with the remainder being distributed among the other architectural styles. Well, partly from the applicant's request, but also concurred with by ARC, they felt it was a little more flexibility was appropriate, where the predominant style might only be as little as 40% of that area. That would allow for a greater mix of styles within a given neighborhood. They felt that was supportable and actually consistent with community design guidelines that relate to that. So that was one of their directions. They also confirmed that compliance with the sustainability requirements of the development agreement and development plan. They asked for concurrence or confirmation of compliance with that. So we will get into that a bit more on the energy side of the presentation. And then they also supported the proposed fence height exception. They thought that was appropriate. So how are the ARC recommendations being addressed? Well, the applicant has better integrated the contemporary architecture, and I believe they have addressed that in their presentation. They're prepared to speak to that. They also intend to provide at least 40% of the units to a given architectural style within a neighborhood. And that's consistent with the intent of the development plan to mix architectural styles. And it's consistent with ARC direction relative to implementing the development plan. And then the sustainability and energy requirements will be discussed in subsequent slides. But first, I want to talk about the development agreement. Now, the development agreement is a very important part of the project. It was approved in 2017, and it really provides the overarching project direction. It provides the key direction on the project intent. It does allow some degree of flexibility in project implementation. The reason for that, by the way, is because it was not possible to anticipate in such a large development some of the details that might go into the design in order to make that design work to meet the overall goals that relate to the number of houses, the different community amenities, affordability, creek protection, parks, and so forth. So in order to do that, it's like putting together a puzzle. There had to be it was recognized that some flexibility was needed to accomplish that. The development agreement also provided performance standards to address energy use. On the one hand, it deferred to the development plan, but it also recognized and set up performance standards that related to this project being not just energy friendly, but actually outperforming what were the standards of the time in 2017 by quite a bit. And that was the bar that was set for energy use in the development agreement. And then finally, the development agreement works in conjunction with the development plan, which you have as an attachment to the agenda report. And that really sets out the blueprint, generally what the project should look like. So on the energy, I'm going to go over this, but we do have Chris Reed to back me up from city staff, who really is the sustainability and energy expert for the city. And he can get into the guts of this a little bit more if you have questions, but I'll give you an overview. Within the development agreement, there are energy provisions set forth in one of the sections, and it has performance goals. It requires the equivalent of energy conservation that exceeds what were then the 2016 standards, because it was approved in 2017, by 15%. It required sustainability features that would be consistent with the then anticipated 2019 energy codes. It also referred to the development plan, which also was prepared in anticipation of those codes. Now, back in 2017, it was anticipated that a net zero energy concept would be the requirement. But that didn't really actually occur in the 2019 code. It went a different direction. The California Energy Commission direction was different. Instead, it made GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, a top priority, not net zero energy. And this would also, the priority would allow for all electric development, which would be consistent with city goals to reduce GHG. So because GHG became the focus, it also became the focus of energy provisions within the plan. Now, to achieve the energy goals, here's what the applicant has done. And this is laid out in some detail in the agenda report. They provided all electric homes and many sustainability features, some of which are listed there, but there's actually a more exhaustive discussion of that, I believe, as an appendix. All homes are 19 to 30% above minimum code compliance. And that kind of response is consistent with the development agreement, which allows for some flexibility and establishes those performance standards. And again, Chris Reed is available for questions answering questions if you have them on that. Now let's shift over to the development plan again and design standards. Now, the Avalon Ranch development plan includes standards related to site and building design, essentially sort of a zoning code. It does, however, defer to the zoning code when it's silent on certain aspects, which it is in certain cases, some of which relate to setbacks, some of which relate to other design aspects, perhaps signage. Although not signage in this case, but walls, fences, and so forth. The intent here is to ensure the development is consistent with the development agreement. So to make the development plan work with the development agreement, it does require some flexibility in addressing certain development plan standards, especially with respect to setbacks and building heights. Now, because it also defers when it's silent to the R2 standards, because that's the zone that would apply, the applicant's proposal sort of addresses the development plan and where necessary addresses R2 standards in what they call their R2 zone within the development plan. It's, from staff's perspective, it's consistent with the intent of the development agreement and the zoning regulations. Now, let's talk about the housing mix for a moment, and as it relates to the development agreement and development plan, and to illustrate one of the challenges staff and the applicant face to try to make this work. Note here in this table, there's the two unit types, cluster and pocket cottage. Well, within the development agreement, it identifies a range of what the sizes of those should be and an average size of what target average size. Now, it did that in the context of affordability. The idea was that these provisions were set up within the appendix that relates to providing affordable housing. And so the idea was, generally speaking, the smaller the units, the generally more affordable they would be. That's in addition to different provisions that relate to deed restricted units. But this is just affordability by design to some extent. So the target was to hit this range. Well, in the Avalon Ranch development plan, the ranges were actually slightly different. Not the same, very close, but slightly different. And then ultimately, the applicants took that and tried to make it work within the site, recognizing there were other constraints related to site size, layout, and so forth. And they came up with a series of units that actually aren't exactly the same and actually are slightly larger than, on average, those that are identified in the development agreement. That allowed for certain amenities to be built within the homes. It also, at the same time, if you'll note here with the pocket cottage, there are units that are smaller than the range that were identified within either the development plan or development agreement, recognizing that it was a goal to provide more affordable housing and to provide some units that were smaller was seen as a way to address this through affordability by design. And because there was a lot of flexibility needed, the overall intent of what they provided to staff appeared consistent, and we believe is consistent with the intent of both the development agreement and development plan working in concert. Which brings us to this slide. So in terms of consistency with city requirements, we believe it's consistent with the development agreement, notably with respect to the housing and energy provisions. You'll note again on the energy provisions, if you read the letter of the development plan, it says a lot of things that are now somewhat out of date because it anticipated a 2019 code that didn't happen in quite the way it anticipated. That's why we have to defer to the development agreement performance standards to use as a benchmark for energy. We also believe it's consistent with the intent of the development plan standards, including standards related to building orientation, architectural style, scale and massing, landscaping, lighting, and energy use. We believe it's consistent with the community design guidelines, which incidentally were in play at the time the development plan was approved back in 2017. So we see that this implemented the provisions of the development plan and thus consistent with the community design guidelines. ARC concurred with that finding. I also believe it's consistent with the intent of the development plan in terms of setbacks, building heights, and lot sizes. There are small deviations here and there. There are reasons for those, and you may have questions about those, but overall, considered as a whole in the package of what the development agreement and development plan envisioned, and then deferring to zoning for certain issues where it's otherwise silent, we believe it's consistent with the overall intent. In terms of CEQA compliance, the Avalon Ranch Final EIR for the entire Avalon Ranch project was certified back in September 2017. It was consistent with the vesting tentative track map, the development agreement, development plan. Those are all addressed in the final EIR. And this project is in substantial conformance with the certified final EIR because it's consistent with all those other approvals. Thus, no further CEQA review is required for this action. Now, there were a couple of issues that were raised through agenda correspondence that I would just want to bring to your attention here. And one of them had to do with housing development in phases 2 and 3, where the question raised was the unit sizes for each product type are identified for phase 1, but not necessarily for phases 2 and 3. But what is also true, and that was true, and in phase 1, it showed an average size and a range. I think those were identified in the staff report. It didn't say specifically in the staff report what the average size would be for the pocket cottage units. We identified that in our response to agenda correspondence. That would be about 1,346 square feet, slightly bigger than what's identified in the DA, but still generally consistent with the overall intent, especially in the context of providing several units that are about 819 square feet. Now, the question was, well, what about phases 2 and 3? Well, what is true about phases 2 and 3 is they still have to provide the same floor plans. They still have to provide the same housing type and the housing mix. So we know that. We also know in phases 2 and 3, unlike phase 1, which skews more to the larger units, the cluster units, in phases 2 and 3, it's more of an even split of the remaining 118 units. I believe it's 61 are the smaller cottage units or the larger cluster units, and 57 would be the smaller cottage units, but roughly an even split. So it will tend to skew towards smaller units in phases 2 and 3. But just to ensure that this is the case, we suggest as a possible condition you could add these two, or the first one here, that future development within phases 2 and 3, the unit sizes for each product type must be substantially consistent with those in phase 1 and include the full range of approved floor plans to the satisfaction of the community development director. The idea being the applicants, if you do approve today, it wouldn't come back to you anyway for phases 2 and 3 for the R2 product. But to ensure that the designs are consistent with the overall mix in phase 1, they would have to be done to the satisfaction of the community development director. It would be true anyway, but this language would memorialize that. The second possible additional condition relates to parks. Now, parks are not under consideration in this application. The Parks and Rec Commission already approved the design of the first 5 parks, which would be included within phases 1 through 3. And we know there's about 5 acres of parkland. However, what it doesn't say specifically in there is how and when those are phased in along with the development. It was silent on that. So we saw this as a potential opportunity to include a condition such as this, where prior to occupancy of the first production unit within phase 1, that is to say not the model homes, but actually production units, that a park development phasing plan has to be submitted for review and approval by the Parks and Rec and Public Works directors. In other words, the implementation of those parks and the timing of those, which would be integrated into the Parks and Public Works planning as part of the application anyway, and the public improvement plans, just to memorialize that process would occur. It would occur anyway, but this is one way to make sure that's the case. So these are really just backstops for things that are likely to have happened anyway, but do address concerns that were raised in the agenda correspondence. There's also a couple of minor corrections. I say there's one, there's actually 2. There's an incorrect date shown in the resolution. I think there's a reference to a March 2020. That's a remnant from an old resolution. We'll update that to today's date. And then I think there was a reference to a number for a resolution that was adopted back in 2017 for the original project approval. I think we got the number wrong. We'll just make sure the numbering is correct for that. And again, it goes back to the recommendations. Our recommendation is to adopt the resolution approving the proposed site plan, design and layout for the R2 component that would be developed in the first 3 phases, including the fence height exception adjacent to the industrial area based on the findings, subject to conditions of approval, that are included for this, but also that apply to the original Avalon Ranch project approval back in 2017, as well as those mitigation measures that were included for the within the final EIR for that project. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, John. That was very well organized. I appreciate it. Are there questions of staff from commissioners?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Commissioner Wilkin.
Yeah, thank you. Nice job, Mr. Rickenbach, on the presentation. Appreciate that. Very concise and thorough at the same time. And I do appreciate the conditions that you suggested regarding the park phasing and the housing size in phases 2 and 3. I just wanted to confirm that since the Planning Commission is being asked to give an approval for the design and layout of all the phases 1 through 3, that phases 2 and the design and layout of phases 2 and 3 are the same as what is being shown for phase 1 in terms of the paseos and the layout of the cluster 6-packs and the 8-packs and 4-packs and the cottages and so forth. Is all that going to be the same for phases 2 and 3?
And I'll respond to that first. The answer is yes. There is a graphic, I think, at the beginning, and it's one of the sheets in the packet that shows that in a more high-level term. But the applicants can also speak to that in terms of the design. But yeah, that would be the same idea there. And
Okay,
I'd also want to point out there are some physical constraints to how development could occur in phases 2 and 3. Those are small areas where 118 units would have to be put in. There's only so many ways to do that. So I think, I'm sure the applicants have given a lot of thought to how that would lay out within those phases, but there's not a lot of wiggle room in terms of designing with the performance standards we've set out, or that you will set out as part of the potential approval here. And I know that a lot of thought's already been given to that, and we'll be working as staff with them on that.
Okay, thank you.
There are other questions of staff.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Shorsman, please.
Just maybe a little bit more clarification would be helpful about the shift away from the net zero requirements. So my understanding of that term, net zero, means that the project would have to basically put as much energy in as it uses. And that was the direction, that's the development plan and the development agreement were written in terms related to net zero, because that was the direction that things were going in 2017 and for 2019 planning purposes. So I'm curious, with the shift to focusing on GHG emissions instead of net zero overall, did that make the requirements easier for this project to meet, or lesser than if it would have been, if the conditions would have been more around net zero? It sort of seems like net zero is written into the development agreement and the development plan, but that's kind of obsolete now, because that's the direction that that's not the direction that things went. And so I'm curious about the impact on that overall on the climate.
Good question, Commissioner Shorsman. I'll start the answer, but I'll let Chris Reed finish the answer. In terms of part of your question is it easier now? Well, what the development agreement says is a couple of things. It says comply with what it says in the development plan, which was written in terms of net zero. But it also says, and this is the performance standard, you need to outperform by about 10 to 15%, depending on the product type, what was in place in 2016. Now, that's the bar, essentially, for how well it has to perform. And that was essentially recognizing what was likely to be true in 2019. And so outperformed that. So that's, and in staff's view, that's what it has done. Now, I'll let Chris finish that answer because he knows more on the energy side than I do. So Chris, if you're out there.
Yeah, thanks, John. And Commissioner Shoresman, thank you for the question. So I think a couple of things happened ahead of the 2019 California Energy Code adoption. So one is just the emerging understanding around the greenhouse gas emissions impacts of natural gas transmission, distribution, on-site consumption. And prior to the 2019 Energy Code, it was actually very hard to permit an all-electric building because the compliance modeling software that you would use to comply with the 2016 California Energy Code, for various complicated reasons, put some heavy just assumption penalties on all-electric buildings. So it was actually very hard to build an all-electric building that was code compliant in 2016. Understanding the total grid value of new all-electric buildings, understanding the emissions cost of mixed fuel buildings, that changed in 2019. And so it's sort of an apples to oranges comparison on hard versus easier. But I will say that certainly the shift to all-electric was a substantial improvement from an emissions perspective. And so when we start to think about what net zero on-site emissions looks like, going all electric and expanding the solar installations above and beyond what's required is a really, really big step in that direction. And importantly, as the grid continues to move towards a carbon neutral grid by 2045, and as our membership in Central Coast Community Energy, which also was not in play at the time of this development agreement, by 2030, we would expect all of the electricity consumed on behalf of the project would be coming from renewable or clean electricity sources that were built sort of on behalf of the participants in Central Coast Community Energy. So this really puts us on a pathway to a carbon neutral operational development in a way that even if you had a mixed fuel building that 100% offset the electricity consumption with on-site generation, absolutely would not. So it's in our view, substantially better from an emissions perspective, not to mention all the other benefits that all electric buildings will bring.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand this, try to clarify. So because these buildings are proposed to be all electric, even if they don't produce all the electricity that they would need to run, it's still better for us reaching our overall climate change goals by implementing things the way that they're planning to than it would have been if we had the net zero goals before.
Yeah, yes.
Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Clunky maybe, but correct.
No, it was absolutely right.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Could I just ask a quick question to Chris, just to follow up on Michelle's question? So does this, what you're saying then, speak to the matter of expanding solar voltaic panels on the roofs still being insufficient to reach net zero in terms of the additional electricity required for an all-electric house? Is that, in other words, we're kind of stepping aside from that at this point? Is that right, Chris?
Yes. So to the extent that the 2019 code did approach net zero energy, it really approached net zero electricity for a house that also had most of its appliances operated by natural gas. So a couple of pieces to that answer. The transition of those appliances to all electric, they are extremely efficient electric appliances. There'll be heat pumps as articulated in the energy attachment D there. High emission or high efficiency coefficient heat pumps. So it will be an extremely efficient house or home energy system. But still, there would be additional load above and beyond what we would have expected in the 2019 code when we were sitting in these seats in 2017. And so even that bar had already shifted. But yes, you're correct that the additional solar system size proposed goes above and beyond the minimum code standard in order to offset additional on-site load, as well as to mitigate some of the potential energy costs that an occupant would experience. And this is consistent with previous cost-effectiveness studies we've looked at, that these really, as proposed, would minimize and actually eliminate the additional net cost you might expect from an all-electric development over a mixed fuel development.
I see. Okay. It's complicated, in other words.
It's complicated, correct.
Are there other questions of either Chris or John from commissioners? Are we good then? I'll move on. I can't quite see all of you at one time the way I'm set up right now, but I didn't see any hands up or anything. So I think we'd like to move to the applicant presentation, and I understand Carol Florence will be representing the applicant today.
Yes, thank you. Good evening.
Well, good, you're already there, and you'll have 10 minutes.
I will do the best I can. Thank you, John, for your presentation. Good evening, Chair Jorgensen and members of the commission. I am Carol Florence, the principal planner with Oasis Associates, representing the applicant Wathen Castanos Homes. This evening, the project architect Michael Stone, associate and senior designer with Basseni and Lagoni, and I will make a presentation and try to leave the balance of the meeting for your ultimate engagement and deliberation. So given the importance of the evening's conclusion, I'm accompanied by Team Wathen Castanos, Josh Peterson, its president, Adrian Burns, its VP of Land Development, Freddie Logie, the VP of Construction, Dan Garson, Director of Land Development, Justin Allison, Director of Construction, Reed Oñate, Director of Forward Planning, Michael Slater, our General Counsel, and finally, our energy consultant, Jeremiah Ellis, who's Director of Design Services with Duct Testers. That's duct with a T, not a K, testers. And they are available to address any of the commission's questions. So I want to thank you in advance for the opportunity to engage with you as we look forward to your adoption of the draft resolution. Our team has been diligently working toward compliance with over 84 mitigation measures and 130 conditions of approval, and of course, the guidance provided by all of the regulatory documents, not to mention the various agreements between the city and the applicant. And nonetheless, we are very excited about being here before you tonight. We have worked diligently with staff for the last 10 months on the R2 product in preparation for this evening, and will continue to do so with staff as we pursue the balance of the project. I know that you reviewed the project supplemental booklet and the ARC's recommendations, as we will simply review the highlights with you now. I am hoping, let me see if I can share my screen here quickly. Let's see if that works.
This is Deputy Clerk Christian. While Carol is working on getting her presentation open, I just wanted to remind the rest of her team who are in the attendee area, if you would like to speak during her presentation, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll promote you as a panelist, which will allow you to turn on your video so that the commissioners can engage with you. Thanks so much.
Let's see if I can do this. Share.
There we go.
Is that good?
Yep, you're on.
Make it a little larger here. And let's see if I do this. So can everyone see my screen?
No, I think it switched to your other monitor, Carol.
Oh, it did? Yeah. Okay. Let me try this again here.
I turned off the timer, so you're not, don't panic.
I appreciate that. And I have to tell you, Kevin was so kind to work with me this afternoon and still trying to get it right. So let's see.
There we go.
How is that? Are you able to see the screen now?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Let's see if I can. There we go. Okay, thank you so much for that. I was hoping that you would pay special attention to how far the project actually has come since its original entitlements that was noted in our booklet on page 1.0. It listed all the permits that the city and other agencies had actually issued up until November of 2020. And I just wanted to update you to tell you that the final map is close, is just awaiting recordation. The project's affordable housing agreement will soon be executed, and we are in receipt of the county's permit for the expansion of Buckley Road as it goes through to South Hygera. So quickly, by way of history, the former planning commissions considered the project on 9 occasions from 2015 to 17, twice to review preliminary draft versions of the project, 3 times during the EIR process, 4 times to consider the project with a final recommendation of approval to the council in August of 2017. And that approval included all the entitlements that John showed you on the screen, and all of the documents as well. And it also included the Planning Commission's recommendations for project modifications. I just want to take a moment and acknowledge that Commissioner Dandekar has the honor this evening of being the sole member who reviewed the project in its entirety and who remains on the Planning Commission to this very day. And to that, I want to express a large sentiment of gratitude. Thank you, Emma. Well, John mentioned flexibility that's been built into the development agreement. I just want to mention anew the tremendous amount of third-party analysis that preceded the development agreement that not only analyzed the project's financial feasibility, but perhaps more importantly, recognized the project's community benefits that are highlighted on this slide. I'm not going to read all of these. This was an excerpt from shared on behalf of the city. So I'll just pause for a second so that you can read that. And I think more importantly, ESP also brought forward the extraordinary project benefits. Again, I won't read all of these, but these were improvements, public improvements or contributions that exceeded the code requirements and exceeded the requirements of the mitigation measures. All told, the value was just shy of $35 million. I know that that's a large number to wrap your mind around, but I think as you will see this project grow and blossom, you will see where that money has been spent, not only on site, but certainly many off-site improvements as well. I just mention all of this because it underscores the substantial amount of time and effort that it takes to create a project of this magnitude. And with that said, I do want to acknowledge my clients, Wacom Castanos Homes. I want to thank them for their continued investment in our city and their due diligence to construct this project in compliance with the regulatory framework. This slide represents the entirety of the Avalon Ranch project with a 6-phase project. This graphic just highlights the R2 products in the phase 1, 2, and 3. Of the 297 units, phase 1 includes 179 units, consisting of 48 cottage and 131 cluster units. I know there's a lot on this slide, but bear with me. Other phase 1 highlights include the improved parks that will be part of phase 1. They will be named, but right now they're called Parks A, as you can see here, Park B, Park C, and my favorite, and I'm sure the Planning Commission's favorite, Chuck Stevenson Park. There's also a multi-use trail along Tank Farm Creek and open space areas, and I just want you to note these turquoise arrows that represent the connectivity through all of the neighborhoods within the project. This slide also notes the affordable units and the workforce housing components of a total of 71 inclusionary units. Phase 1 includes 9 of the 25 workforce housing incentive program, or we call WIP units. There will be 13 in phase 1. And I would just note quickly this arrow here, A and B, as I move to the next slide. So thank you. I realize that's a lot of information on one slide, but thank you for bearing with me on that one.
As you switch the slide, Carol, I just want to bring up, there's a question about what phase 2 and 3 look like by one of the commissioners. So you guys can see both phase 2 and 3 on this slide up on the top section are a continuation of that cluster module that we're showing in phase 1.
So the homes that you see in the ARCPC booklet will be exactly like the homes that you'll be seeing constructed in phase 1. And so we are paying very close attention to the sizes of those, because we're attempting to achieve a certain, if you will, level of square footage across the entirety of this particular type of product. So we're very cognizant of that. We have lots of fabulous Excel spreadsheets, but I didn't bring those tonight to share with you for obvious reasons. So to this next slide, and I'm going to leave this one, I think, to Michael to talk about the elevations.
As Carol mentioned in her introduction, my name is Michael Stone. I'm with Basseni and Lagoni, and I'm here to represent the architecture piece of all of this, along with everything else. These two street scenes, as labeled Earthward Drive and Venture Drive, show a representation of what we're envisioning for the outside perimeter and interior street scenes throughout the community. They're noted on that previous site plan and also in your ARC packet if you wanted to see the exact location. But I think what this shows overall is a unique mixture of elevation styles, types, colors, and then you can also see how that cluster module creates a nice separation between each of the homes in the cluster going through it, where you can see the cars, those would be the drive aisles, and then you have the paseos on the opposite interiors where more trees are obviously planted.
This is Commissioner Conway. I have a question. Is it appropriate for me to ask at this time?
Sure, go ahead.
You'll wait for the end?
It's probably better to wait to the end. Just so
let's wait till the end. That's fine.
And by the way, we're down. The 10 minutes is just about finished. That won't count questions. So.
Well, I'm hoping, Chair Jorgensen, that you'll let us get through this. This is really our one and only opportunity to share all of this with you, and we are hoping that at the end that you will adopt the proposed resolution accordingly. So if
you and Michael kind of keep working quickly.
We'll go quickly through it. So if you want to go to the next slide, Carol. So this is a rendering from the street scene, typical of what we just saw, showing how that Paseo interaction works. You can see there's a trellis entry monument that kind of signifies the entry for each of those clusters. That was something that was asked for by the ARC, which we gladly reinstated into the design.
So this site plan is just highlighting the cluster and cottage homes. And so I'll quickly move to the Paseo Layout here, which Michael will take.
So this is the typical cluster layout in phase 1, where you have the cottage product, which is on the left side, and the cluster product on the right side, where they share a Paseo down the middle. And you can see there's a good separation between each of those. And each of the homes kind of gets a unique private space, which we'll kind of roll into in the next slides.
This is an example just of the type of landscape architecture that one could employ. And you can see there's quite obviously areas to do a number of things, and these spaces range up to 800 square feet. So it can accommodate, patios and overhead structures and vegetable gardens and barbecue areas all along this really nice Paseo. So you're not seeing garage doors; those are on the alley side, if you will. So I think this is a very, very nice presentation. Again, these are our 4-lot cluster homes. You can see where they're located here. I'll just move to the next slide.
Yeah, very similar to what we talked about before. These obviously have a little bit larger lots. As Carol brought up, the alley look presents kind of a two front door approach to them with the Paseo down the middle.
I wanted to also just share these few units here on Vachel Lane with you, only because Vachel is going to be widened and a little busier than we all experience it now. But we've taken these and provided an additional visual buffer with lots of landscaping. So you can see it here in plan and here in section. So we are attempting to customize, if you will, this entire project.
This is just a conceptual perspective of what it would look like kind of in that typical Paseo between the units. And as you can see with that Paseo design, having front doors on the Paseo as well as on the alley, you get a design that kind of promotes an interaction between the neighborhood and a little bit of a security, as well as a nice, comfortable pedestrian access throughout the community. This is the other side of that, showing the cluster or the cottage homes. We just looked at the cluster homes, but it represents a little of that front yard patio space that each home gets as a private yard.
I just call this slide the buyer's choice, if you will, which is a hallmark really of Wathen Castano's homes and their vision for really providing their customers with the maximum amount of building choices. So as you can see, 9 unique floor plans, 5 architectural styles. This is actually our smallest unit here, which is about 900 square feet. And you can see the variety of color and material choices as well. I'll let Michael describe these. These are basically slides. We'll go through these quickly.
Yeah.
That architectural review asked that we modify. So I'll let you go ahead with that, Michael.
Sure. So as John mentioned, there were some feedback from the Architectural Review Commission about the contemporary elevation design. And what we'll show in these next few slides is the transition from what we had presented to them and then where we're at now. As you can see on the right side, we've reduced kind of that parapet wall look and brought in a single story roof edge that really mimics and plays off of what we have going on in the other elevation styles. So there's a little bit more harmony and cohesion between the different elevation styles throughout the whole community. This will be the cluster plan 4. Again, same kind of changes with the single story roof line. We also went to a board and bat material on the siding versus a horizontal siding. It's still same kind of massing, but different type of feel.
This is one of the items that was brought up during staff's presentation, and it's really an excerpt from the development plan's proposed methodology for architectural diversity. So we felt that 60% of one style was a little too heavily weighted. So ARC allowed us to go 40 to 60 on each of these. So I think it will make for an absolutely lovely mix of neighborhood.
And Carol, you can just kind of
quickly,
click through
Michael,
these.
if you want to just say a few words.
Sure. So we just threw in to show you kind of what the color schemes are. There's 5 color schemes per elevation style, as was mentioned before. John brought up that there's 179 total combinations between all the plans, color schemes, and elevations. That'll really give the community a nice sense of variety and a unique sense in San Luis to kind of a sense of identity, I guess, for the entire Avila Ranch neighborhood. And then this just highlights a few of the architectural details that we're using throughout, as far as front doors, porches, light fixtures, just for a reference for you guys. John
introduced this slide, and I'm sorry if it's I apologize for this slide. I do. I think, again, I'll just note that this interface with trust automation was really important to get right, because quite obviously sometimes the homes are closer to level, sometimes they're slightly above, sometimes they're slightly below, but we wanted to propose items that we would have the maximum amount of privacy along these homes. So we did a lot of work to make certain that that was the case. So we hope you appreciate that, but that is the only exception, if you will, that we are asking for at this juncture. I wanted to give you an indication quickly of the timing of the improvements that Wathan Castanos home will be making, not only on the site, but off-site improvements that will benefit the smaller community and, if you will, the larger community of San Luis Obispo. I know that you're familiar with many of these roadways, and I'm sure that modifications to them will resonate with all of you. So I'll just note the parcel list of land development improvements. The extension of Buckley Road to South Hygera will, with a completion date of about this time next year, huge improvement. Widening of Buckley Road and the addition of bike lanes. If you're a biker, you know how important that is. We have completed 2 improvements, Suburban Road and South at Hygera, and we apologize for any construction delays there. We will be widening Vachel Lane, and part of the reason is for that additional vegetative buffer from those homes, as I showed you on that slide. And then Vachel Hygera, which is directly related to Buckley Road extension, as the left in and left out will be prohibited at that intersection upon completion of Buckley extension. Everyone knows that intersection, so I don't need to tell you more about that. And then to the home construction, we're currently in the building permit plan section of the home construction. We'd like to start, and we anticipate starting those homes in January, our model openings in April, with production homes in March. And hopefully at end of summer next year, we'll start to see folks occupying that with, again, completed parks with that. With that said, that concludes our presentation. I do want to thank you for your time and consideration. Michael and I and the rest of the team are here for any of your questions. I did want to mention before we go that we feel that the additional conditions of approval are unnecessary at this point, because again, with the 130 conditions of approval and the 84 mitigation measures, as well as all of the language that really is embedded in our guidance document, and that guidance document is a development agreement, we feel quite comfortable that those are somewhat redundant and unnecessary, and we hope you feel the same as we do. With that said, I look forward to the commission's comments and questions.
Let's see if
Thank
we've
you so
got
much.
questions to make then. Commissioners, do you have questions of
Yeah, I do.
Carol
Steve
or
Kahn here.
Michael? Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Kahn.
Thank you. Appreciate it. First of all, very good presentation. Like I said earlier, it's a lot to wrap your head around here. It's quite a complex project. And not being involved in this project for much of it, I'm just kind of new to this, but my major question is, where did it come about that we were going to mix Spanish with bungalow and contemporary? And I'm not against it, I'm not for it, I always thought you blended, a certain theme to a neighborhood, like you had a Spanish neighborhood or you had a farmhouse neighborhood. So I'm not opposed to it. I just would like maybe a little background as to how the concept came about.
The original context goes back to the development plan that was in those percentages that were established. We're kind of following along those guidelines, but the goal of how it was set up was to respond to San Luis Obispo as a community as a whole and bring in elevation styles representative of the entire city. And that's how you get the unique mixture that's being offered here. Okay. Carol probably has some more to add to that.
Do you feel as an architect that it's appropriate, that's a good, idea to have mixed architectural styles in one neighborhood?
I do. I think the way we have it set up in these clusters, by mixing the elevation styles allows the homeowner to kind of have a unique sense of place inside each of those clusters. I think if you were to say all of the cluster was one style, it starts to become a little bit more, I'll say, of an apartment home or condominium type scenario, which, you know, it has its pluses and minuses, but I think the way that this is set up as single family detached houses, having the variety of elevation styles offers a lot more to future homeowners in selection.
And just to add to that, Commissioner Khan, you asked for some background. The ARC actually went through this quite a bit back in 2015 and 16.
Okay.
And there was a long discussion about this, and they ultimately supported the concept for a lot of the reasons the applicants are saying. And so that became part of the project approval in 2017.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that the job they did on the architecture of the houses is nice. I like it. I just had never quite seen this blend of different styles. So you've answered my question. Thank you very much.
I think Commissioner Khan, it harkens back to very, very early 20th century subdivision where every house was different. No two houses were alike. So I appreciate the comment though.
Thank you.
So,
Michelle Shoresman here. I have some questions, if it's okay.
Absolutely.
Again, thank you for the presentation. Very thorough, really well put together. I appreciate slide number 4 that you showed with the arrows showing the different paseos, because I do have a question about that. And to Commissioner Khan's point, I think this just reminds me, the variation in this project reminds me of sort of the opposite of what I grew up thinking was a tract home. You know, we used to call them cookie cutter, where they all looked the same and you went into a neighborhood and every single house looked the same, and this doesn't look like that. So I actually appreciate that and agree with what the applicant said about, you know, it's sort of creating a sense of place and a home buyer feeling like their house is a little bit more unique than their neighbors. And I see that a little bit in the Rigetti Ranch area. I think there's a little more variety proposed in the Avalon Ranch. But if you drive or walk through Rigetti Ranch, you see, you know, some that are kind of craftsman stylish and some that are kind of farmhouse stylish. And so anyway, I don't think it's completely unique to what were other developments that we're seeing built in the city right now. So that's sort of my general commentary, but then I had several questions. So I don't know if you can go back to slide number 4, just so we have a visual of the arrows showing the paseos, because that was one of my big questions. So yes, thank you. So it looks like a majority of the paseos, or maybe not a majority, but a good portion of the paseos go through from, for example, Venture Drive to Bravo Street, and Bravo Street to Tango Street, and Sky King Drive, and the external, I guess I would call them externals, the ones that sort of back up to Trust Automation, and some of the ones that back up to the park, Park A, are the ones that are really one way. Is that correct? Where you kind of have a dead end at the end? My concern originally was, if these are all one way, then they really don't provide much pedestrian connectivity to streets and to getting out to Venture Drive and Vachel Lane and so to speak. So just want to clarify that most of those do go through.
I think in places where we don't actually show, and I'm sorry for the scale of this drawing, it's quite small, but I think we were trying to communicate that the pedestrian connectivity was probably one of the most important. I think the whole Paseo concept with turning your front doors to each other, as opposed to having garage doors, if you will, facing each other, is a bit of, I'll just call it social engineering for that neighborhood interaction that we seem to miss in other subdivision designs. but you're able basically to walk through all of these. I just think it was starting to get cluttered, and my poor graphic designer I was making him mad when I was having him do this. So in some situations, there might be a planter, but even if with that planter, I think that we would be recommending to the landscape architects that there be stepping stones through the plants so that you can get to all of these locations without only going out onto the street and onto the sidewalk. So I think the whole connectivity between all of these neighborhoods was really key. And it is unique because, you know, we have the creek basically running diagonally through that. So, you know, we have a lot of natural beauty that we can take advantage of. And although these homes, you know, are on small lots and the homes are small themselves, I think we really tried to provide a neighborhood feeling. So
yeah, and to emphasize that, you brought up the Park A. At Park A, there's specific paseos that are actually enlarged beyond just our typical to help promote that pedestrian access through those communities. You can kind of see it. It's a little hard at the scale, but on the right side, you have kind of two 4-unit clusters off of Earthwood on the south side of that. Then there's a really wide green paseo there. Then we go 3 more clusters, and then we have another wide paseo. It's about, I think there's an extra 10 feet or something. Maybe it's 6 to 10 feet, I think, in extra width on those paseos than the typical ones in the cluster.
So thank you for drawing attention to that area in particular, because I wondered why not have, is there a fence line on those other paseos prohibiting people from getting through from their paseo to the park? Or is that just a, you know, like you were mentioning, sort of a smaller walkthrough?
Yeah, there's a smaller walkthrough. There are some locations where you do have the fence line for the private yards, depending upon how that cluster or unit sets up. But there is the intention that any one of those paseos, you have the ability to get to the park pretty easily.
Okay, and then what about once you get to a street, say Earthwood Drive? If you know, I'm going to the lowest common denominator in my mind, you know, a child walking through to their friend's house between, you know, Tango Way and Bravo Street. What happens when you get to Tango Way or Bravo Street? What's the pedestrian? I'm assuming there's no sidewalks there because they're smaller streets. So what's the pedestrian?
There will be sidewalks because the houses, some of the houses are actually fronting on the street. The majority fronting on the paseo. So these will be what I consider, you know, typical curb gutter sidewalks. It's just that the paseo is an added pedestrian walkway to get to your front door as well.
There is going to be a enhanced pedestrian access at some of those paseos to go across Earthwood Drive to some of those areas. I think, Carol, if you went up a couple slides to the where we highlight that one, the one right before that. I think this one, just because of what we were trying to emphasize, it really highlights that wider paseo connection all the way through. Next slide up. Before.
Oh.
There you go. So you can see Park A as that dark green at the bottom, and then there's that dark and the wider paseo there. So you'd have an enhanced crosswalk going there that would then continue into the wider paseo between the clusters on the other side. And it's not shown on this, but there is kind of that connection if you go back to the arrows of that paseo, then going up through the rest of the community.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. And then I don't know if this is a question for city staff or for you all, but what are the pedestrian and bike improvements that are part of this project on Vachel Lane? I heard sidewalks. Are there going to be new bike lanes? Sharrows, what's the plan for that?
Yes, Vachel will be improved much beyond what it looks like today, with additional bike lanes on it. Absolutely.
Okay, and then Venture Drive, that seems like a wider street. What will that have in terms of?
Actually, all of the streets will have bike lanes. I'm sorry, I maybe should have showed a section of the streets, but all of them do. So there's a tremendous amount of connectivity, both for pedestrians and for bicycle traffic. So as well as obviously the multi-use trail, which can be used for both. So not really segregated on that, but they are on the streets. I think that at the end of the day, not only the on-site improvements, but there is a tremendous amount of off-site improvements that are going to be made that I think that everyone's going to really appreciate.
Yeah, and forgive me for asking some of these questions. Like Commissioner Khan, this is somewhat new to me, and so I am curious about the connectivity that's required. So the bike lanes and the sidewalks that will be put in are part of the project, are all the way along the frontage of this project, all the way to Hygera. Can you clarify that for me?
Let me clarify some of this. A lot of those questions can be answered to a large extent by going through the development plan. In the development plan, it has a circulation plan, just like a general plan would, or a specific plan, which shows a lot of the improvements. You asked, the improvements that are going to be happening here are essentially to make this project completely connectable to the west over toward Vachel Lane and out, ultimately Buckley out to South Hygera, where there's going to be, depending on the roadway, different sorts of bikeway improvements along the major streets with connectivity, including some class 1 bike trails through both along the creek area and then also along Buckley Road, just as an example. I could go through the development plan, but there is a series of improvements that they'll either be directly responsible for building, or in certain cases, off-site improvements where fair share payments will be made toward some of the improvements that are otherwise city improvements, all of which is sort of memorialized within the development agreement. Mm-hmm. So I can go into some more detail. I'd have to really kind of go through that, but I'm prepared to do that if you'd like me to. But I would refer you to the development plan and the development agreement, the appendix and I think I spoke with you, Commissioner Shoresman, about the appendix that showed some of the financing plan that shows the layout of all the different improvements that they're responsible for, or paying fees toward improvements for citywide improvements.
Yes, you did. And I looked at all of that, and it's just easier to visualize it when you're staring at it on a map. So apologies, like I said, for the questions.
No, not at all.
Then the one last question I had was about some of the setbacks. Most of them I can see are how they would be consistent with the community design guidelines, and the where they aren't, they're consistent with the development agreement and the development plan. There were some that I noted that seemed exceptionally small to me, and I did talk to staff about this as well, but some of the, I guess they would be called internal setbacks, are only 3.5 to 4 feet. How many of those are there? And how many of those are there, and approximately where? Or are they kind of scattered throughout?
I think they're kind of scattered throughout. I'm not sure I can give you an exact number without going through the site plan at this point, but they're mainly the tighter setbacks are noted on the smaller product, which is the cottage units. And the 4-foot setback is fairly typical on that kind of product setup and layout for that size. It's 4 feet to the property line and another 4 feet to the house next to you. So you still have 8 feet between the houses. So it's not like you're that far off from the typical, say, 10 foot that you'd see in a subdivision with a 5 and 5 side yard.
Okay, thank you. That actually clarifies a lot to me. I just wasn't clear from looking at the pictures if that was a 3.5 to 4 feet total between houses, or if it was.
No, it'd just be the side yard
line for
that house. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's all my questions, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Perhaps I could
Yes, please.
add some things because it's very exciting for me to see this actually to come to fruition in this way. We looked at this project many, many times, and for my fellow commissioners, the development agreement was exhaustively debated by Planning Commission. We were very concerned, and my thought is that the development agreement has meant that this particular project is doing extensive contributions that I think are going to benefit the community in the long run. So I just wanted to assure you that was something I think Carol will remember. We spent long hours, sort of many conversations around what we would like to see. I think the fence issue that's raised, it seems like the solution that has been suggested makes quite sense. In fact, it gives you better protection for the residential. I was long waiting for this project at this level, because I remember asking about housing typology and what the various unit sizes were going to be. And I was fortunate enough to get a copy of the physical plan and have had a chance to look at it in some detail. And I must confess, I'm very excited about what the solution has been. I think it's the design element is very creative and innovative. It's of all the projects we've had, when we've had several large projects we've approved, this palette of styles as well as sizes, and the ability for somebody to pick and choose between them, having, the same kinds of plans, but with different kinds of architectural choices that a resident might be able to take from. I think that's a very good introduction for us in the city. I don't know that many of the subdivisions that are coming up now have had this flexibility of architectural choice. And as an urban planner, I think this is a very good thing, because this is how organically communities, neighborhoods came together traditionally. There was a grid, there was a pattern, but then within that rhythm, people chose. And that's why the neighborhoods are much more interesting than if you go to, not to slam Phoenix, but if you go to the suburbs in Phoenix, it's all Spanish style. And it's all really boring, and you can't tell one area from another.
Or Santa Barbara.
Yeah. So I want to commend the design team and the project for bringing this to the city, because I do think that you've made a contribution that others will emulate. I don't think we've had quite this sort of ability to pick and choose for people who are buying into a project offered on the design side before. I had a very slight question, because if you remember, Carol, we were always concerned about the affordability units up on the corner there. And I was happy to see that the road goes through. And I'm hoping that once that project is developed, that it's sort of seen as a seamless and integral part of this community. I remember that was one of the concerns that we voiced earlier in the approval process. And it would be nice to hear about that. But otherwise, all I can say is that this was worth waiting for. It was really what we were pushing for: the size of the units, the scale of the units, and the typology of housing types. As an architect and urban planner, I'm very happy with what you brought to us today. So what about the connection with the affordable units up in the corner?
Are you talking about the R4?
Yes,
Yeah.
those are all affordable. Is that not right? Isn't that the ones that would be the affordable
They
unit?
are multifamily, R4, so they are much more dense. One of the projects, we are currently working with an affordable housing builder. That was part of the conditions of approval. And then the other, I think, will have a tremendous amount of affordability, which let me just say that Commissioner Dondikar, you and the former planning commissioners over what 3-4 year period did an exceptional job of detailing the framework. You realize that my client Wathan Castanos purchased this from Mangano Homes. So their due diligence to understand what this all meant was extremely detailed, the analysis of it. And so I don't know if, sometimes with so many cooks in the kitchen, if you will, you end up with an awfully strange looking. I think this is exactly what I'm hoping that the Planning Commission had in mind. And with your discussion tonight, it just warms my heart that we did it. Right? We took these concepts, we took the tremendous amount of regulatory framework. Part of my job was to go through all of the mitigation measures, all of the conditions of approval, the development agreement, and try to somehow package that so we could understand it and move forward with that design. So I can't tell you how much it means to me and my client tonight, Commissioner Dondikar, for you to acknowledge that. I know all of a sudden it looks like, well, here it is, but here it is has taken and will continue to take a tremendous amount of effort and time and consideration to get to this point. And that's why I'm saying it took 10 months to work with staff just to get together on these R2s. So rest assured, we are leaving no stone unturned when it comes to that. So I very much appreciate your comments.
And Commissioner Dondikar, just to close the point on, you asked what's going to be in that R4 area, just as a reminder, that'd be 125 units, higher density units, 24 of which would be deed restricted lower income. Another 16 would be for low and moderate income. So there's going to be quite an opportunity there when that development comes through.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Thank you. So let's check here. Are there any other questions from commissioners? I want to move then to the public, if not.
Yes, I have a question.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 questions. First of all, I'm not familiar with the trust automation building and use, and I was wondering if the fence height exception is intended to address mostly privacy, or is it also for noise reduction purposes? I'm not sure what's going on at Trust Automation. Is there it's like a warehouse operation or something like that with trucks near the property line?
Now let me get to that slide. Sorry for having to flip through these so quickly. We'll get there. I think it is a matter of privacy. I don't think there's a tremendous amount of noise. Everything is internal to the building. I just think it's for the sake of privacy. As you can see, Commissioner Walken, the difference in elevation between where the homes are and where the parking lot from Trust Automation is. So this is really retaining walls and fencing and vegetation. It's really about privacy and not an acoustical concern.
And to add to that, in the EIR, that was not identified as one of the noise concerns that required mitigation. However, it will likely provide some noise attenuation just by design, if there's any issues with parking cars and moving cars in that parking lot.
And I don't believe the operating hours of Trust Automation are like a fulfillment center where it's going 24/7. I think they have typical operational hours.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I understand the concern or the intent for screening and privacy. It also looks like there could be parked cars that might be adjacent, so the fence would block headlights from shining into the residential area.
Correct.
So my other question has to do with a provision in the development plan that requires integrated power outlets for electric vehicle and bicycle charging. And I'm not exactly sure if there's a difference between that and what's being proposed with this project, which says in the staff report, dedicated circuit for EV charger pre-wire. So maybe you could explain what's being offered as part of the project and why aren't the, if they're different, why aren't the integrated power outlets being offered as part of the project?
I'm not absolutely certain if I'm the person that should address that, and I don't, Kevin, I don't know if, is any of my team raising their hand? I can't tell from this end.
I can start it while you look.
I'll go ahead and bring anybody from the team forward as they raise their hands as you address it.
Thanks, Michael. Go ahead.
Yes, the big issue with providing a specific outlet for electric car charging is that every manufacturer has a different plug type. So if you just set the house up as what we call a pre-wire, it allows the homeowner to then install the outlet or cable that they're using for their particular car. With all of the circuitry already there, they just have to install it from that pre-wired location.
So is that fairly straightforward for the homeowner to do?
They'd usually have to hire an electrician based on the voltage that's there, but it's pretty easy. And there'd be a panel installed in the garage where the pre-wire would all be set up. So it'd be an easy adaptation.
If I might, that is rather essential right now, Commissioner Wilkin, because there's no standardization for electrical vehicles. My daughter has been complaining or commenting to me about that. Young people are very interested in these electrical vehicles, and she's been talking about the lack of. So I think this is a kind of transition period we're in. Eventually, we'll get a solution for where we are with the technology.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question.
Yeah, can I add to that just to further clarify maybe? So from my understanding, because we just had a level 2 charger put into our garage because we bought an EV. And so my understanding is that the electrical work that needs to be done is to, I'm sure I'm going to say this wrong because I have no electrical background whatsoever, but my understanding is that the amount of electricity that has to come into the charger is more than you would have for a regular 110 outlet. And so that's the electrical work that needs to be done when you have an electrician come in. Otherwise, if you were handy enough, you could install the charger yourself if that was already in place. So I guess, so this is the clarifying question for the applicant. Is that what will already be in these garages? Is that electrical, that higher voltage capability to charge, to then attach a charger to?
Yeah, I think you'd still have to hire an electrician to do the actual attachment, but the idea is that the wires are already run through the wall at the higher voltage to a specific location. Mm-hmm. And that the electrician can then just open that panel and install whatever plug needs to go in, versus having to run the wires from your electrical panel all the way through the house or garage to then create that panel for the plug.
Oh, that's really good to hear.
Yeah. And then for bicycles, all that's really needed for most electric bikes is enough space and a spot on the wall where there's a regular 110 charger. So assuming that most of the garages will have regular 110 outlets conveniently sort of located around the garages for bikes.
You just have your standard application of the regular house 110 outlet, and it'd be up to the homeowner to which side of the garage I think they park on to leave space for their bike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so have we completed questions from commissioners?
I have one.
Okay, let's keep them to questions too, if we can.
Yes.
We'll still have time for comments.
Yes. Question on the conditions of approval, the development agreement and development plan all say, I'm going to read this, prohibit left turns onto and out of Vachel Lane and South Hygera Street intersection. My specific question is, how are they going to do that?
I know we have plans for that, Commissioner Khan. I don't know if I have those ready to show.
That's okay. I don't want to take up a lot of time on this. I just want to make it a point that the only way you stop vehicles from making a left-hand turn is if you have a physical barrier. Signage does not do it. So you have to actually put what's called a pork chop there that says when you're coming out of Vachel, you can only turn right. Physically, you can only turn right. When you're coming off Hygera, you can only physically turn right. Because if you leave it to a sign, your vehicles will not obey the sign.
No,
Okay.
I agree with you. I see where you're going. I think it is some sort of meat-driven thing. It's a pork chop or a
Right.
modified pork chop,
Yeah,
or
call it pork chop because it's
short
shaped.
rib, or so, yeah, you're right. You need a physical barrier in that particular location. Signage will not do it. No.
And Commissioner Khan, I just want to add that this is the kind of issue that Public Works is working with the applicant team in the design of roads to make sure it does work. So I'm not in Public Works, but I know that that's a key consideration for them.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's all I have.
Okay, so I'd like to see if we can then move to comments from the public. And I wanted to ask Deputy City Clerk Christian whether we've got folks lined up to speak, or we have folks who wish to speak about this item.
At this time, I'm not seeing any attendees raising their hand. As we're still sharing the applicant's slide, and I don't want them to necessarily take it down because you may have further discussion. Let me just walk through it quickly for anybody that would like to make a comment on this item. Please raise your hand. There is a raise hand symbol and the words raise hand in your menu bar for your Zoom. Go ahead and put that up. All right, I am now seeing one for Dan. I will bring Dan forward as a panelist. Dan, you'll get an invite that you have to accept, and then you'll be able to share your video once you accept that and move to a panelist.
And let me reintroduce Dan Garson. He's the Director of Land Development, which means he is dealing with all of the on-site and off-site transportation utility improvements. So he will have a better answer than I did when I said pork chops and short ribs.
And Mr. Garson, this is Deputy Clerk Christian. I will be timing you. You have 3 minutes, and I'll give you a 30-second warning.
Great. Thank you so much. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Khan, I just wanted to help you with your comment about the intersection of Hygera and Vachel. So we've done the first of 2 improvements at Hygera and Vachel to make the turn off of Hygera onto Vachel to widen that and improve that. And then our second improvement will actually be adding pork chops and adding other elements to that will prevent that left turn. And of course, with the improvements on Buckley Extension, much of the traffic that would have used that intersection will no longer be using that intersection.
Thank you very much. That's what I thought. I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll go back to Assistant City Clerk Kevin to find out if there are members of the public, as opposed to the development team, that would like to make comments on this proposal.
Perfect. At this point in time, I do not see any further hands raised in the attendee group. And I will go ahead and leave Mr. Garson in the panelist area in case you had further discussion questions that you needed his attendance.
Okay, and should we wait a minute to give people a chance to raise their hands?
I believe that we've probably given them sufficient time during the past comment to go ahead and raise their hands.
I'll turn it back to the commission for discussion and hopefully quite soon a motion. who'd like to begin? Not all at once.
I'll begin, or I see.
Good. Commissioner Wilkin, please.
Okay, unless Commissioner Dandekar was first, I'm not sure. I see her hand up also.
And we're going to start with the W's and move backwards. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Thank you. First of all, let me say that there is a lot of information here to review. I wasn't on the commission when it reviewed the project last in 2017, I guess, and before. And after having reviewed everything and read the staff report, listened to the presentation tonight, and my questions have been essentially answered. I am excited about the project also. I think that it is generally consistent with the development agreement and the development plan and the tentative track map and the other approvals and the general plan and the zoning and so forth. I do especially appreciate the connectivity of the paseos. I actually didn't realize that so many of them connect to other paseos. When I was looking at the tentative track map, it didn't appear that way, but your exhibit that you showed, Carol, really shows the connectivity. So I appreciate that. And I think that's really a positive feature of the project. I also support the fence height exception and the recommendations of the Architectural Review Commission regarding that. I think they had 4 items, the 40 to 60% of the architectural style in a neighborhood, the sustainability, energy sustainability, which I think meets the intent of the development agreement, development plan, the fence height exception, and the contemporary architectural scheme. And I think the revisions that were shown tonight for the revised contemporary elevations are excellent. So I appreciate the applicant's team working on those revisions. And I think those are consistent with the community design guidelines. And I think the variation in architectural styles within the neighborhoods is also consistent with the intent of the community design guidelines as well. So appreciate all of that. There is one concern I have, and I don't know if staff can or someone can show this on the screen. It has to do with one of the elevations for the Spanish style cluster. I'm sorry, it's the cottage plan. I think it's cottage plan number 4. Let me see if cottage plan number 4 in the Spanish style. There are 2 elevations on that style that have what looks like essentially blank walls, 2-story blank walls. And I didn't think that really is consistent with the community design guidelines. And so I was wondering if staff or someone could show that so we can take a look at it.
Do you have that, John? Because I could find it if you don't.
You'll probably find it faster than I will, but I'll look too, and whoever gets there first wins.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for 1 second here.
So I can keep speaking on that. There are 2 community design guidelines that I think are relevant here. One has to do with emphasizing vertical and horizontal articulation. And the other has to do with not having a detailed facade facing the street and a more bland facade on the rear. And I think that's the case here, in my opinion. So I would propose that we have first I'd like to ask the applicant whether there is some additional detail or articulation they could add to those elevations. And I guess I'll wait for.
Well, Carol's still looking for it. I can go ahead and start. I think part of the concern that you have there is we're missing some windows that potentially should be there for those bedrooms. So I think if we were to add those windows, if you look at the floor plan, there's windows and then there's a living space on the first floor. So I guess I'd ask the question back to you. If we were to bring those windows into those rooms to break up that blank wall, would that address some of your concerns?
Yeah, I think that would definitely help. Windows would definitely help, but I would like the other commissioners to see what I'm referring to.
Carol, it's sheet 8.2.
Yeah, I actually have that. I just need to figure out how to get sharing again here.
If you want me to pull it up, I can pull it up right now.
Well, while you're doing that, I'll just also state that I do support the 2 additional conditions that staff suggested in their presentation at the beginning regarding the unit sizes and the park phasing for the phases 2 and 3. Okay, so as you can see on the left and right elevations on the left-hand side of the screen, the lower 2, those are pretty much 2-story blank walls. So I just wanted to point that out for the other commissioners. I think that does not meet the intent of 2 of the community design guidelines, and I think windows would definitely help a lot. And so I was wondering what other commissioners thought. And so how many windows do you think there would be on each of those elevations?
We can add a few. Carol, if you wanted to flip up one sheet to the floor plan, the big blank wall is really on that garage side. So you'll see there's the owner's bedroom on the second floor and the bedroom 2 on the second floor. We could add some windows to each side of the bed there to help solve that. Second floor, the first floor at the garage is obviously going to be a challenge, along with the kitchen cabinets. Adding windows there would eliminate cabinet and storage space for the homeowner. So we wouldn't necessarily address windows on the first floor. That house also then is adjacent to the fence line in the house next door with how that cluster module sets up. So it wouldn't even be visible on the first floor of that right elevation behind the fence line. So I think if we added the windows on the second floor, that would alleviate most of your concern there. As far as the left elevation, we can take a similar approach in adding a window to bedroom 2, which would be kind of right in the middle of that. And if you wanted some additional articulation, we could probably add some shutters on that window in the exposed corner lot conditions, if there are any.
And Mike, I just want to ask a question here. On those walls, was one consideration, and I don't know this, that those walls actually face each other in 2 different units and you don't want to look into each other?
Yeah, that'd be the right side elevation. So it'd be something we need to look at for where those windows got placed. But I think we could easily add 2 windows in the second floor somewhere in those bedrooms to break up that stucco wall and not necessarily have that conflict with the house right next door as far as a direct window view issue. Thanks for bringing that up, John.
Yep.
Okay, I think windows would be a good way to help with the articulation and reduce mass. I'd be interested to see what other commissioners think. I was saying before that I support the additional conditions that staff recommended or suggested in the initial presentation regarding the sizes of housing units in phases 2 and 3 and the park phasing. And if it's a little bit redundant, then it shouldn't be a problem. So I support those conditions. So I'm prepared to support the project. And I would ask staff if the other commissioners agree with the window idea, do we need a condition for that? Or give direction, or what would be the best approach?
If I could just speak to the issue of windows, I think sometimes it's hard to find where in a bedroom you can put the bed. or and windows if they're not. I could see the virtue of having high windows, but oftentimes when you're planning units, if you have a window in a wall space, it really reduces what you could do with furnishing. So I would support the idea of the architects looking at perhaps high fenestration to break up the mass. I'm not too concerned at the lower level because with the side yard and the fence, not many people are going to see the elevation. And I think having some, I'm not too worried about the lower level, I should say. And perhaps we could leave with the idea that some fenestration would be welcome to break up the elevation, but I would be comfortable with higher, smaller windows just to puncture that space a bit. If we ask for sort of legal egress style windows in a bedroom, you really end up having no wall space against which you can plan a furnishing layout.
I'm confident that our architect could follow that lead, Commissioner Dandekar.
We definitely can, and it would be something that we would, of course, want to pay attention to, because if you give someone a house and a room that they can't use, then what's the point? But I mean, I think the gist of it, at least from our perspective, is we'd be happy to work with city staff on establishing where those windows should be on the elevation that work with the floor plan. If you guys are open to us just working with staff on that.
Are there other comments from other commissioners, or are we ready for a motion here? Gotta get ourselves moving.
Well, if I could make the motion, this would be great for me, and then commissioners could come in. I too support the addition of the two conditions that staff recommended. One, that phase 2 and 3 typology be consistent with phase 1, and that the park, I think the applicant has already addressed the fact that the parkland needs to be approved before the first unit is occupied, but I think it's fine to put in the condition just to underline it if the applicant has no objection to that, but it seems like they're already doing it. So if I could make the motion that starts on page 31 of our package, which is to make a motion to approve the resolution to approve the San Luis site design and layout for 297 residential units within the R2 component of the Avalon project, etc. I think the verbiage is outlined there, and so are the findings. And I would support the addition of the two conditions.
Thank you.
I'll second that. With the if the motion maker would agree to add direction, to give direction to city staff to work with the applicant to provide some windows on the left and right elevations of cottage plan 4, Spanish style, to reduce the apparent mass to the satisfaction of the community development director.
That would be fine with the motion maker.
Okay, thank you.
Just a question for consideration. Do we want to specify windows specifically, or is it overall change in mass? Are there other types of articulation that we want to give them flexibility to do if windows won't work for some reason? I don't have a preference either way. I'm just throwing that out there.
I think that's a good idea. We could say to provide windows and or other details to reduce apparent mass. If that's okay with the motion maker, I think that's a good idea.
I support that. I think there's a lot of architectural sophistication demonstrated in these projects, and they'll come up with a good solution if they give them the flexibility to play with either architectural elements or windows.
Are there,
So I would support that change.
good, thank you. So are there further comments on the motion? I think we're ready to vote. I'm not seeing anybody. Kevin, can you call the roll?
Commissioner Dondekar,
Yes.
Commissioner Wolkin,
Yes.
Commissioner Khan,
Yes.
Commissioner Shoresman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Quincy,
Yes.
Chair Jorgensen.
Yes. So the
Motion
motion
passes.
passes unanimously.
I
Thank you
just
very
wanted to
much. That was
Thank
very.
you all very much for your consideration. We have worked hard to get to this point. We will continue to work hard, and I know that all of you and the community will be pleased with this project at the end of the day.
Thank you all.
Thank you. So we're ready now to move on to item 4B. It may take us a minute to get our screens reset and get everything going. And we'll look forward to hearing from Rachel in just a minute. So Kevin, you let us know when you're ready. Move on to the next item.
For any time, I believe that Rachel is going to be sharing her screen. And so I'm going to just hold off on sharing mine.
Chair Jorgensen,
Yes.
sorry to do this if everyone wants to keep moving forward, but would you mind if we took a 5-minute?
I think it'd be a good idea. And that'll give everyone time to kind of get together here. So we'll we'll step aside for a minute and we'll come back together at 8:05. Okay, let's really make it 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have everyone back?
I could see everyone at once. It'd be so nice. I see Steve, I see Mike, I Nick, Ema, and Michael Hopkins is back to join us. Well, let's jump in and see what happens here. So the next item is item 4B, and that's a review of the of Title VII, the zoning regulations with objective design standards for qualifying residential projects. And we'll begin with a report from staff. Rachel Cohen, please.
Thank you, Chair Jorgensen.
Good to
Good
see
evening,
you.
commissioners. Good to see you as well. This evening, as you mentioned, we're going to be reviewing a set of objective design standards for qualifying residential projects. The staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt a draft resolution recommending that the City Council introduce and adopt an ordinance that would amend Title 17, which is our zoning regulations of the municipal code, and include a new chapter in the zoning regs for objective design standards. The Planning Commission's role this evening is to review the proposed amendment for consistency with the city's housing element, as well as state law, and make a recommendation to City Council. So in November of 2020, the City Council adopted the housing element update, and I am pleased to share this evening that the state of California has certified and found our housing element to be consistent with state law. So that's really exciting. That happened at the beginning of September. So
thank you.
We have a certified housing element, which is really great. And this evening is actually, we're going to be focusing on program 6.22, which is the objective design standards. And this was added to the housing element in response to recent California legislation. And the legislation outlines streamlined and ministerial processes or by right ministerial review for specific eligible residential developments. Projects that qualify for ministerial review must be reviewed against objective standards and cannot be reviewed through the city's discretionary entitlement process. So there's two main categories of residential development that qualify for these objective standards. The first group are those projects that comply with SB 35. And SB 35 allows streamlining for residential projects in cities that have not met their RHNA numbers. And the city of San Luis Obispo is one of those cities. Eligible developments have to meet set criteria, including requirements for affordability, location, and compliance with city general plan and zoning regulations. The other group of residential projects are what are defined by the state as use by right. These are projects such as transitional and supportive housing, housing developments in which 20% of the units are affordable to lower income households. This is also reflective of two new programs in the housing element, 2.17 and 2.18, and as well as residential projects that are otherwise deemed subject to ministerial processing per state or local law. So I want to talk a little bit about what an objective standard is. Objective standards do not require judgment to determine that a standard has been met. An example is a maximum building height or a minimum setback. The city does have many objective standards established as part of our various policies, thresholds of significance, and development standards within our general plan, our zoning regulations, engineering standards, active transportation plan, and kind of the list goes on of all of our different policy documents. However, in the case of design, many of our standards are not objective. The task with Housing Element Program 6.22 was to develop minimum design standards to ensure that new development that qualifies for this ministerial processing is compatible and complementary with existing development, while also allowing for flexibility and creativity. So I put together this slide to sort of provide a little bit of a context of what we have currently, which is our community design guidelines. That's the CDG. And you can see through the highlighting I've done, there is the use of conditional phrases such as should, as well as use of terms such as consistent. These would not be considered objective language. The draft objective design standards, the ODS, uses terms such as shall or same in place of those more conditional phrases. The context, though, you'll see throughout the objective design standards, we try to reflect a lot of the concepts and design principles of our community design guidelines, but in a more objective form. So the objective design standards are divided into different kind of groups. We have building and site design for all zones except for the downtown. And then we have a section for the downtown building design, which is design guidelines for just for the downtown. And then there are other design requirements which apply to every zone, including the downtown. So over the last several months, staff has worked with an ARC subcommittee as well as local professionals and garnered the feedback from those groups to basically develop the draft objective standards that went to the ARC in August. The ARC reviewed the draft objective design standards and recommended approval of them with some proposed changes, which I'm going to cover in the following slides here. So with the first recommendation, I just kind of want to set up a little bit. There are a lot of numbers referencing a lot of our standards. So I'm going to actually just refer to the last sort of last numbers and letters, as opposed to referring to chapter 17.69 every time, just so we don't get lost in the numbers. Just wanted to set that up for you. So the ARC recommended that the objective design standards 20 B3 and 30 B4 be modified to allow for Spanish style architecture, as well as industrial or historic architectural representations. And the reason that this issue was brought forward was that the standard, as it was currently written, or was previously written, was would preclude the ability for a residential project to potentially move forward with a Spanish style residential building that's all stucco, or maybe a more historic leaning building that might be all brick. And so the ARC wanted to revise, staff to revise the standard to identify a specific type of architecture. And we, staff looked at that, and the difficulty with specifying particular architectural styles is that a lot of folks have different interpretations of what those architectural styles are. So instead of defining the architectural styles, staff is recommending that the requirement for the use of a minimum of 2 materials be removed from the objective design standards, as you see here on the slide. In addition, there was another objective design standard. It's 20 D4 that staff is also recommending be revised to allow the use of 1 material in the exterior of a mixed-use building. The ARC's second recommendation proposes a change to objective design standard 20 B3 and 30 B4. These are the same. This is part of the same objective design standard I was just talking about in the previous slide. Sort of the second part of it. So with that first part, staff is recommending that first part of that standard be removed, and then a modification to the language on the second part regarding veneers was amended per the recommendation from the ARC to provide more specificity on where the veneers should end or how they should be finished. ARC recommended that objective design standards 20 C2 and 30 C2 be modified to require that the minimum eave be 12 inches. So the staff has modified the language accordingly. They also recommended that objective design standard 40 H1 include the option to use paint to screen mechanical equipment. In order to be consistent with another objective design standard in 40 H2, both of these were modified to allow paint to be an option to screen mechanical and backflow preventers. And ARC also recommended and provide direction that objective design standard 20B1 include language to allow metal to be used within the residential zones. The previous standard had not allowed it at all, and they felt that metal could be used on residential, but largely as an accent material. So that's been changed, as you can see on this slide. ARC also provided direction that the objective design standards should include requirements for privacy. And so staff developed standards 20B11 and 30B14, which clearly lay out window placement to provide privacy from an adjacent structure. And I just want to note that part of this language is similar to language we use in our edge condition language in the zoning code that we currently have. Another recommendation from the ARC was that the objective design standards should include open space and amenities for residential development within downtown. Staff considered this recommendation and the objective design standards actually do provide open space requirements within all zones except for the downtown commercial zone. And that's because open space wasn't set for a requirement for downtown for several reasons. And that's one, it's anticipated that the entire site in the downtown will be built out since there are no setback requirements and there's the ability to develop the entire site with 100% coverage. Additionally, downtown is one of the areas within the city that is closest in proximity to many amenities, such as parks, creeks, restaurants, businesses, et cetera. And then lastly, the open space requirement would be an additional cost for an affordable housing project that's not required of any other residential projects in the downtown. Staff agreed with the direction provided by ARC regarding illustrations. However, to maximize the ability to provide examples and explanations, staff is actually developing a separate document that will accompany the objective design standards that'll include illustrations, images, and other information that will be helpful for the development community and the public in understanding the objective design standards. So instead of trying to fit them all into the municipal code, we actually would are preparing a separate document for those. Lastly, the ARC voiced that the objective design standards should include a requirement for visual access into open spaces for visibility and safety. And so staff developed objective design standards 20B12, which would require that any and all residential units that front, face, or overlook an open space provide at least one window that provides overlook. So those are the recommendations from ARC, and this evening staff is looking to the Planning Commission for any additional feedback. Some questions to think about is, do the standards seem clear and understandable? Do any standards seem difficult to implement? And or is there anything missing that you noticed? I do want to note the project has been found to be exempt from CEQA per the common sense exemption because the proposed action consists of only the adoption of new standards for objective review of qualifying projects. And the standards will have no physical effects on the environment and no possibility of significant effect on the environment. The objective design standards are consistent with the current development standards within the zoning regs, and that all projects that comply with the objective design standards will be required to comply with all relevant city standards, codes, and regulations.
Thank you, Rachel. That's very nice, very concise. So do we have questions for Rachel? I'm looking. Michael Hopkins, Commissioner Hopkins, please.
I have one question, Mr. Chairman.
Wait, I'm sorry. I was trying to call on Commissioner Hopkins, but
oh, I'm sorry.
he was muted.
He's not on my screen. I'm sorry, I didn't see.
No. I'm having the same problem. Commissioner Hopkins, can we hear you?
You appear to still be muted.
Dog isn't muted.
Well, maybe you'll think of something in a minute. Your showing is muted. Now you're not. Now you're showing yourself speaking. Might just turn up your own computer volume just in case.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I think I figured out what was going on. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry about that, everyone.
It's okay. Welcome.
Thank you. So I had a couple questions. The first one is, can you clarify for affordable housing projects that are utilizing state density bonus law, would your exceptions or incentives be applicable to the objective design standards, or would these be exempt from those exemptions?
Yeah, so there's actually a section in the in sort of the applicability section of the code that states that these could, you can, if you're doing a density bonus, you can you can ask for concessions or exemptions from these requirements. Largely, if it's prohibiting the ability for you to be able to build that additional density on your site.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I saw that language. I just wanted clarification on exactly if you could apply the exemptions directly. Thank you. And then two more questions. In section B1, I was just looking to see if there's any clarification on the definition of high quality. It says buildings shall use a high quality exterior wall materials. And of course, I'm not advocating for low quality materials being utilized, but it seems, I don't know, I guess it's getting into, in my mind, the more subjective space. So I was just wondering if either we could add clarity around that, or maybe you have a more clear definition than I can understand right now.
Yeah, so you could potentially strike out high quality and just utilize that list of materials. That's sort of the intent, is that you have that menu, and that menu is your list of high quality materials.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, because I could see that maybe getting into a little bit of a difficult space. And then my last question is on section C4, and this is for both 1769-20 and 1769-30. When it is discussing roof-mounted equipment shall not be visible from the public right-of-way, would solar panels potentially be exempt from that, or would that be inclusive of solar panels?
So those would be exempt. Would be consistent with our current zoning regulations, which exempt the solar panels from as being essentially considered rooftop mounted equipment.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And that's it for my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And Commissioner Wilkin, you had a question and almost got it out.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your staff presentation, you triggered something in my mind, and it has to do with the ARC recommendation, I think, for minimum 12-inch eaves. Is that right? And I seem to remember reading somewhere else in the proposal about minimum 24-inch eaves. Maybe it was in the mixed use section. And I was just wanted to make sure that was intentional, if that's what it says, or if that was an inadvertent, if that was inadvertent to keep the 24 inches in there instead of the 12 inches.
Yeah, so we did look at that, and because the and I'll have to look a little deeper to find that exact one, but what it's a part of is a menu for the mixed use development. So it's not in conflict with the 12-inch requirement. It allows for a developer to select that as their sort of option from a menu of items. So it's kind of asking for a wider eave at that point, as opposed to just the minimum 12 inches, if that makes sense.
Okay, so it's an option. It's it's one of several things that they can do to meet that standard, in other words?
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Other commissioners? Yeah, I can't always see all of you at the same time here, so you all look very quiet, patient, well-behaved.
I just raised my hand, Chair
good.
Jorgensen.
Thank you.
I don't know if you can see it or not, but I raised it anyway. So thank you, Rachel, for talking to me yesterday about some of my questions about the bicycle parking items in particular. When we spoke, or something that you said in your presentation sort of reminded me of part of our discussion, which was about some potential areas that might be missing from the section C, the bicycle parking area, because, and you had said that you omitted some things about short-term parking in particular, because they were already covered in the zoning regulations or the community design guidelines or the active transportation plan. But the fact that these are objective design standards, would it be worth bringing more clarity to those items that might be covered in the community design guidelines or zoning regulations or active transportation plan? Because in those documents, the elements are more subjective. I'm thinking in particular of, for example, I know in the active transportation plan, there is some allowance for upside down U racks in circumstances, which I would assume would be subjective, instead of the peak style racks. So I'm wondering if that might be something that we can make more objective here.
Yeah, so the active transportation plan does provide objective standards in that they list that 2 bike rack types are allowed, and that's a U rack and a peak style rack. So those are pretty clearly stated in our policies, and there's not really any subjectiveness except that there are 2 options. So if the Planning Commission wanted to require that these residential developments use a particular style of bicycle rack, then that would need to be included here. But our standards currently as they're written are objective, and we can require that they provide one of 2 styles of rack.
Okay, and then the other area that I know we've added to resolutions in the past related to bicycles was racks that can accommodate larger bikes, for example, cargo bikes, or I think they're called bucket bikes. And I don't know if there's an objective standard about that in some of the other documents, the community design guidelines, zoning regulations, et cetera.
I'm not aware of any requirements for that. The challenge would, I think, be, or not necessarily challenge, but I think in addition to not only requiring a rack that could allow for that, there might also have to be a requirement that a certain number or that sort of thing, because we don't have in the code right now any provisions for a certain number of those types of racks. So that would need to be part of that requirement as well. Not only that the project provides this larger style rack, but then also a way that there was direction on how many, where they might be located. There's certain things like that that aren't covered by our code currently.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, so do I see any other questions at this point of Rachel? Good, I'm going to go then and open this up for public comment. Kevin, are there any members of the public who wish to speak, as far as you can tell?
We have one hand up. It's identified as the San Luis Obispo Chamber of Commerce. So I'm going to go ahead and promote them to a panelist. And if you could, you'll have to accept this, and then please identify yourself by name for the commission.
Hello, Chair Jorgensen and Commissioners. This is Molly Kern, and like it says, I'm speaking to you on behalf of the San Luis Obispo Chamber of Commerce. Before I get into our comments tonight, I really want to thank the staff, particularly Michael Cadron and Rachel Cohen, for working with our Economic Development Committee to share the draft standards, and also to share our congratulations on the certification of the housing element. That was so much work that you and so many volunteers at the city did, and is really great to hear that it was finally certified. Tonight, I'm here to support the adoption of the objective design standards. We appreciate the changes from the ARC, especially the added clarity and addition of illustrative examples. That was a top priority for our board, as the goal of these standards is to make it easier for people to move through the process. And we know that those types of illustrations and visual examples can make the difference for so many people. Given the likelihood that these standards will be updated over the next few years, we urge the city to make tracking the success of these guidelines a top priority. Comparing the project type, time from submission to final permit, and the number of units that are approved through the objective process, and comparing the same metrics for projects that are moving through the discretionary process will allow us to understand the efficacy of this program and zero in on which updates need to be made into the future. So thank you for your time tonight and for all of your service to our community on this commission. It's such important work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you. That would be interesting to find out. Is there any other public comment, Kevin?
There's no other public comment.
Okay, I'll bring it back to the commission for deliberation and hopefully a motion fairly quickly here. Comments, questions?
This is Commissioner Hopkins. Can you hear me this time?
Yes, I sure can.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a couple recommendations that I would like to throw out there. I think this is a great start. As working in development, often just consistency in the process is more valuable than essentially any other part of the development saga you end up ultimately going through. So I just have a couple recommendations I'd like to propose for the commission. I think I would like to strike high quality in section B1. Again, not in the interest of removing the high quality type materials. And I think the list there is very helpful at outlining that these materials would be of high quality, just that the term itself lends some subjectivity that I think is a little bit counterintuitive to what we're trying to accomplish here. In section E1, the requirement of 100 square feet for common area space versus if that could not be provided as a private outdoor space seemed a little bit out of step with industry standards for what we've seen in the affordable housing development world for common area space. And so another suggestion that I would propose for the group is to change that 100 square feet to 75 square feet. That 25% reduction really gets us more in step with what we're seeing required by regulatory agencies, as well as on just what we're doing here on the Central Coast. Section F3, which has a percentage of requiring 15% landscaping. When we were just taking a look at that compared to some past projects, just in more urban areas, I think it'd be appropriate just to back that up to 10% landscaping. Most developers will go beyond that anyway, but just if we're talking about minimum objective design standards, that's a change that I think would be helpful in moving projects along. I'm sorry, I'm running through these pretty quickly. Only got two more, I promise. In section F5, which outlines tree removal, basically outlining that a 1-to-1 tree removal rate on site. I wanted to propose the possibility for my colleagues here of maybe an in lieu tree option at a higher ratio off-site on the off chance that it's a more, again, I'm visualizing a more urbanized infill type site here. And sometimes retaining all the trees on the site can be really onerous. And if the city can get net more trees out of the deal, I think that would be ideal. And then finally, I'm not exactly sure on language here, but I think it would be beneficial maybe to allow a sentence creating some kind of deferral to state design guidelines for affordable housing programs set by HCD and the Tax Credit Allocation Committee in case there's a conflict between the design guidelines here and those provided by the state regulatory agencies that ultimately finance the type of affordable housing. Something that would, if there's a direct conflict with state design guidelines, that it would be a deferral to those guidelines. And again, those are more specific to individualized programs. I'm not saying just referring to state development code as a whole. So I know it's a lot that I'm throwing out there right now, but just those are at least top of my mind, what I would like to see ultimately land into these objective design standards. So thank you.
Thank you. Who else?
I can chime in. This is Commissioner Shoresman, if that's okay. I can, well, first, I just want to say too, I agree with Commissioner Hopkins. This is a great start. I hope this is a somewhat living document. I realize it can't change too frequently, otherwise it gets confusing for people, but I think this is the most objective set of standards that I've seen so far in compared to some of the other documents that have some objective and some subjective standards kind of mixed together in them from what I have read so far in my short time on the commission. So I appreciate the objectivity. I generally am agreeable or amicable to most of the suggestions that Commissioner Hopkins mentioned. The one that I have a little bit of trouble with, and while I understand his desire for creating consistency with other requirements, I kind of am partial to the 100 square feet of open space. I'm kind of an advocate for open space when it is practical and possible. So I am less happy about reducing that to 75, although I understand his reasoning behind it. The other thing goes back to the questions that I asked of staff regarding bicycle parking. I don't have any exact language written up, but I would like to see something added both in regards to short and long-term parking that more directly excludes upside down U-racks and promotes or requires the peak style racks. I don't have a particular affection for peak in particular, but upside down U-racks are extremely inefficient, hard to use, and require you to have a kickstand on your bike. And you often see bikes just fallen over if they don't have kickstands when they're locked to the upside down U-racks, and they're really not desirable in most situations. So I would like to see a direction to staff to come up with some language around that. I have another recommendation about creating space for larger bikes, but I see the difficulty in that Rachel voiced, and so I'm not quite sure how to word something around that. But I would. It is something that I would like to see going forward, if not in this revision or in this version, then maybe in a future one. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just ask a question while I'm waiting to hear from other people. In the affordable housing world, we've noticed that developers and applicants can pick from several exceptions to the and have rules waived as part of the, in a sense, the bonuses for higher density and more affordable housing. Can open space per resident or that per unit be a waivable item? And from the way we've dealt with this, Rachel, is that something you can answer, or should we ask Tyler maybe?
It would be if it is precluding the ability for them to max out the density bonus that they're proposing.
Mhm. Just wondering. Mhm.
Would that also apply to the landscaping going from the 15%?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with any, currently like our setback requirements and height requirements. If the requirements in our objective standards precludes them to build out to that, there's, to actually construct the project with the number of units that they've proposed, they could ask to have an exception to any of these requirements.
And Chair Jorgensen, if I might actually ask a quick clarifying question, I might actually walk back that statement because I took another look at the resolution and I think I might have misunderstood. Rachel, can you confirm that the common space in section E1, I'm now reading it says inside or outside a residential building, so that's common area space, so that'd be inclusive of, say, a community room, community kitchen, and then also maybe a play structure as well?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
that idea with that language is that, not because of some of these projects being a mixed use project, as I was looking at examples and thinking about the urban context, it may not be possible to have every open space outside. And so that was part of it. Also, a lot of projects provide amenities like gyms, lobby, or not lobby areas, but like community rooms or community kitchens, and these other community spaces. The other thought was we've been dealing a lot with looking at the resilience and climate change with the city. And so if you have air quality issues or heat issues, having indoor areas might actually be beneficial. So the standard was actually written to be pretty flexible for that 100 square feet to apply to either an indoor or outdoor space.
Thank you for that clarification. Actually, yeah, I will walk back that statement because now that I'm looking at 100 square feet, that's both inside and outside. That makes a lot of sense and is really in line with industry standards. When I read that in my mind, I just thought common space has a very specific TCAC definition. So that's where my brain was. And so that's actually, far more in line. And thank you for that clarification.
No? Okay. Are we moving or can we move closer to a motion here to move us along? And
I have some comments, Mr. Chair.
Okay, please go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank staff for their work on these objective design standards. I think they've been needed for a while, and I'm happy to see them. And I think for the most part, they're really good. I did have a few changes as well that I'd like to propose, in addition to what's been suggested so far. As to the in lieu offsite tree removal suggested by Commissioner Hopkins, I think that's an interesting idea that I'm willing to consider. The 10% landscaping, I may be tempted to consider instead of the 15. Don't think I have enough information about the deferral to state design guidelines right now. Maybe I can hear more about that. But the things I wanted to suggest have to do with, two of the things have to do with increasing the amount of flexibility in design. I think there's a couple of standards here, including one recommended by the ARC that just are too restrictive and limit design flexibility by projects. And I wanted to go over those, and hopefully staff has some suggested language ready to show. The first one is found on agenda page 340, and it's 020B2, and it has to do with the use of materials and colors. And if staff could show that one, I'd really appreciate it. Great, yeah. So Okay, so essentially what the standard says now, the way it's written, is that buildings are supposed to use the same colors and materials and detailings on all the elevations, and that street-facing elevations may use more detail, but the colors and materials are supposed to be the same on all the elevations. So the example I have is many buildings that you see, especially single-family buildings around the city, have the use of different kind of materials on the front and maybe on the sides. For example, stucco on the first story and wood on the second story. And they may be on the street elevation, and they may wrap around a little bit on the sides, but they're not on the rear. And so that would technically violate this standard. Also, in the project we just looked at, Avalon Ranch, there are a number of elevations that I saw that would not meet this standard because they had combination of materials on some of the elevations, but not all the elevations. So I think we need more flexibility here. So that's what I would suggest, changing this to read that the building shall use the same colors, materials, and detailings on the most visible elevations. And then street facing and the most visible elevations may use more architectural detail, period. So that.
And Mike, I would just interject a little. I did, there's a little bit of color you can see on this particular slide because I added your recommendation, and then I realized as I was reading it that it uses language like most visible. And I thought maybe that I should point out that might be seen as not objective. And so I wanted to just point that out to the commission to consider, and then potentially identifying what is meant by visible elevations, and identify that instead and say on the visible elevations, and then define visible elevations are those elevations that may be seen from the public right away. That's staff's proposed language, but that could be modified.
Thank you. I think that's a good addition to make it more objective. So the way I'm suggesting it, I think would at least allow the elevations that we looked at today in the first item, and would give more flexibility to projects, and still call for the use of to have consistent elevations without every elevation having to be exactly the same in color, material, and materials. The second example suggestion I wanted to make has to do with an ARC recommendation regarding overlooking public and private spaces. And I understand the intent here, which is to have eyes on the street, so to speak. But the way it's written is that all residential units that overlook or face either a public or a private outdoor space have to have at least one window that overlooks it. And so I think that presents privacy concerns, both for the residents of the units and for the people in the private open spaces, at least. So I don't see why every single unit in a multifamily building that could front on an open space has to have a window that looks out to it. So I would simply recommend the last line there that's underlined that says residential buildings shall include windows that overlook outdoor spaces. And I think that achieves the intent without requiring every single unit to overlook a private and a common open space. So that's my suggestion there. I think that allows much more flexibility, but still gets to the intent, which is to have some eyes on the street, so to speak, or eyes on the common open space. And the other suggestion I have has to do with open space. And I agree with Commissioner Shoresman about the need for open space. The way the standard is written, it allows or requires either private open space at 65 square feet per unit or common open space at 100 square feet per unit. But in my view, it's important to have both. I think, especially with your affordable and smaller units, I think there's an even greater need to have some sort of fresh air for, or private open space with fresh air for residents. So I'd like to see some way to require a combination or both private and common open space. And this is one suggestion I had. I'm open to other approaches too, or other ideas from commissioners, but my suggestion would do is require the private open space at 65 square feet for a majority of the units. I put in 60%, as well as 100 square feet per unit of common open space. And so I'd like to see what commissioners think about that. And I'm certainly willing to be flexible on this standard. Maybe 60% isn't the right number. Maybe it should be 50%, or maybe it shouldn't be 65 square feet. Maybe it should be a little less. But anyway, I'm interested to see what other commissioners think. I think private open space is important, especially for affordable and smaller units. So those are my suggestions. And again, I'm willing to entertain the 10% landscaping, the off-site tree removal suggested by Commissioner Hopkins, and the bike racks suggested by Commissioner Shoresman. If that's not a problem with, if staff doesn't have a problem with having a different standard for that. And I'm open to hearing more about the deferral to state guidelines. So thank you for bearing with me on those changes.
Are there other comments or comments specifically on Commissioner Wilkins' approach to this?
I have a comment.
Commissioner Khan.
Just a general comment. I think I've kind of tried to follow all these comments. I think they all have some merit to them and they're worth discussing, but I wonder if we're going to get anywhere trying to wordsmith all this stuff tonight, and if we shouldn't have staff collect all of our comments and our intent and go away and take another shot at it and come back. I mean, I hate to do that to anybody, but are we really going to be able to wordsmith all this stuff tonight? That's my comment of mine.
I'd like to echo that actually, because my head has been spinning with all the suggestions, and I know staff has put in a lot of time. Objective design guidelines are very slippery, and you never know exactly the implications of making a change here and sort of its interpretation. So I would actually like staff to consider some of these suggestions that have been made and come back to us with those that they think, that are appropriate, or any concerns they might have about them. I'm a little concerned about the off-site, in lieu off-site landscaping, because I think the proximity of green to habitat is really important. And if it's somewhere else, you don't get that kind of, ability to kind of interact with trees and birds and whatever else. So, I have some questions about that, and I'd like staff to kind of reflect on it and say, what are the consequences that they see, and what would they recommend? And that might apply to a number of the suggestions that have been made today.
Thank you for that. So, Rachel, is that a question you can respond to in terms of any urgency with these objective standards that would be difficult to achieve if we did have another session on this with some Proposed revisions?
So Tyler Corey, principal planner with the City of SLO, is also on this at this meeting. So I'm going to let him go ahead and actually respond to that one.
Sure.
Sure. So we are under a deadline in our housing element. So that's kind of the main issue we're facing, that within 1 year of adoption of the housing element, that we needed to have this particular program in place. And Rachel, remind me of the exact date that we adopted. I think it was in November.
It was November 17th, 2020.
So November 17th. So that's our obligation to the state to get this done. And we need to commit to that, and we need to make that happen. And so in terms of where we're at, we have council set up for, again, Rachel, is it first meeting in December?
That's correct. The 2nd of November.
So what's that?
It's the first meeting of November, which is
first meeting in November. So we are on track to meet our obligations without a continuance at this point. So a continuance would not allow us to do that. And so my suggestion would be that we work through any, wordsmithing refinement as long as it might take to get this done so we can stay on track.
Okay, commissioners, what do you think?
Well, I think we got to try to work with staff and get this thing done then. I mean, if we're in their time deadline, I totally get that. And the state doesn't mess around with housing elements. We know that. So anyway, those are my two comments.
Yeah, I have a question for staff, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Yeah, did I understand staff to say that we have an obligation to the state to complete these objective design standards? I thought it was a program in our own plan.
Correct.
In our housing element.
Yes, it's a program in our housing element that says that within 1 year of adoption of our housing element, which was November of last year, that we would update our ordinance requirements for compliance with state law that this accomplishes. So yes, we are under obligation to do that. Our reporting requirements are much different than they were in our last 5th cycle housing element. They're much more stringent, and there may be penalties associated with compliance with our deadlines.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess I have a question to staff, if I may, Mr.
Sure, please.
Tyler and Rachel, you heard a number of comments from us. I'm sure you've been taking notes. Are you prepared to sort of tell us if those seem reasonable, or if any present problems? Since we're on the deadline, I don't want to put you in the hot seat, Tyler or Rachel, but I'd like to know your reactions.
I think that so far what has been discussed are reasonable modifications to the current objective design standards. And that, I think too, that one thing that the commissioners can think about is whether a particular standard is urgently needed right this minute kind of thing, or is it something, I know Commissioner Shoresman mentioned like genders, we talked about the large bike racks. That might be something that comes out of further development of other standards within the city. So I think that's something the goal for these particular standards is we want to get that, they need to get implemented pretty much as soon as possible, because we essentially have, or there is the possibility that a project could come in the city's doors tomorrow and we don't have any design standards, objective design standards that we can review it by. So that's a little bit why the program in the housing element was developed in such a short time frame, is because we want to make sure that we at least have kind of the core design principles that we want to move forward for housing development included. And we definitely see, I know that Commissioner Shoresman mentioned this as well, that this will be an ever evolving section of our zoning regulations that will continue to be amended as, state law changes and as we want to continue to refine the design of our residential development.
I mean, I would add, we're currently out of compliance right now because we don't have them, right? We have some, we have height, setbacks, floor area ratio, the basics. But as Rachel mentioned, if a project comes in, that's all we have. So, some is okay, but more is better.
The project will come in. I mean, the state is setting it up where they want this stuff. They want it mandatory and they want it not objective, or they want it objective, and that's it, period.
And we may not 100% agree on any particular ones here. So those of you, Commissioner Wilkin, what's your response to this concern about, to the urgency concern? In terms of how far we can go tonight and where we should go. Or
Well,
whether we can hold off on some of these.
I suggest that we just go through each of the suggestions and take a straw vote as to whether commissioners like the idea or don't like the idea. If they don't like the idea, then we don't have to wordsmith that one and we can move on to the next one. If they like the idea, then we can worry about the wording. So that's what I would suggest.
Commissioner Wilkin, were you typing on a Word document that we could track through and go to each one?
It was, so I'll be able to provide that for the commissioners.
Yeah.
Well, it's worth a try. Let's give it a try.
All right, give me a moment. I'm going to pull up the document again. So this is the first one. This was a recommendation from, I believe it was Commissioner Hopkins, to remove high quality from the building materials sentence.
I agree with that.
I like that too.
I agree.
Same.
Anyone who doesn't, can hear you out.
All right, not hearing anything of anyone oppose. This second one is the requirement of building materials on all elevations and the modifications proposed by Commissioner Wilkin. And then as well, there's the, I'm gonna put here, the blue highlighted areas are staff's kind of amendments to Commissioner Wilkin's recommendation based on sort of the subjective language in the standard.
So the question of more architectural details, more than what?
More than, yeah.
I think that means more than the other elevations.
Yeah.
So I think the idea is that you can use more detail on the street elevation, for example, than other elevations.
So it's colors, materials, and detailing. More colors, materials, and detailing, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me just reiterate that the purpose of my suggestion here is to make the standard more flexible because the way it's written, I think, precludes perfectly acceptable design like the designs we saw today earlier in the agenda.
So the more, just to clarify, the more is more colors, materials, and detailing on visible elevations than non-visible elevations. Correct?
I believe that's the intent, yes. So if we wanted, we could even state street facing and visible elevations may use more colors, material, and detailing as opposed to just architectural details, so that it's consistent with the sentence above.
Didn't you use the same concept? Does it need to be stated then non-visible elevations? Or is that obvious? Most.
Woken, can you respond to that?
Oh, well, that was the language that was in there originally. I think it could go either way. You could add that for clarification. I don't know if that sentence is even necessary, but I think the main point is that the visible elevation should use the same color, material, and detailing, I think, is the main point, instead of all elevations having to use the same material, color, and detailing. So that allows more flexibility.
Maybe it's just omitting that second sentence and just saying that buildings shall use the same colors, materials, and detailing on the visible elevations. Visible elevations are those elevations that may be seen from the public right away.
I think that works just fine.
I'm supportive of that.
Me too.
Okay.
Any other comments on this one, or should I move on?
Move on.
Well, I
Go
guess I'm having trouble kind of overruling the architects that both on the ARC and others, local architects were brought in to kind of work this through. I guess I'm just not sure there's a big gain in somehow focusing on the visible elevation so much. It's almost like we had a problem earlier where there were some windows missing on ostensibly not an especially visible elevation, and it's just not quite clear to me that we're making a big improvement here.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
So
That's a good point, Chair. I mean, I was looking at this one wondering, I mean, since everyone's spending so much time on it, maybe we just delete it and move on if it's not helpful.
Yeah, I am having trouble with the wording here. I don't know how I would interpret it if I was trying to apply this to a building.
Well, I'm fine with deleting it. That would resolve my concern that it's too rigid.
Yeah, and I agree with that even more.
Is that the result that that number 2 itself would be deleted? Or just the additional language?
I believe that the proposal is to remove the entire standard altogether.
And Rachel, the history of this in front of ARC and the panel of local architects was what? I mean, did this come up specifically, or was this?
No, this is actually derived from the community design guidelines that talks about not having one-sided architecture, having materials and colors wrap around the entire building. That's sort of where the direction came from, and then that was presented to the ARC, and there wasn't any questions at that point raised. But that doesn't mean that you guys can't raise questions.
Well, if you think about it, if you're downtown and you have a building backs up against another building and you can't even see it, why would you want some architectural elements on it? So I can see that side. At the same side, I can see a developer trying to cheap out and not do all the sides and make it look good. So I don't know. It's a tough one to be objective, I think.
Well, reading the ARC minutes, part of the examples that they were concerned about were just, let's say there's a facing material, a board, it goes horizontal board, and they wanted to be sure it just wasn't cut off solid so that it was very obvious that it was just attached in a simplistic way, but rather that it kind of faded into the rest of the building so that it looked a little more structural.
Right.
And it seemed to make some sense. So, okay, so let's see who's where on this. So one possibility is number 2 is struck completely. Another possibility is we have some language on for all facets, all elevations. And the third, I guess, and usually we have supporters for all. The third is just the visible from the public right of way. So we've got sort of 3 approaches here. Can we sort this through real quickly
Yes, I think just to clarify, we have the option to keep it as it's currently written. We have the modifications proposed with a little bit of some tweaks by Commissioner Wolkin, which would basically kind of eliminate the second sentence, I think, and then clarify on visible elevations. Or there's the option to delete the entire standard.
Okay, so how many are in favor of removing that second sentence?
I'm in favor of removing it.
I hear 2.
I am also.
Same here.
I hear 3.
And I think Hannah also was agreeing with that too.
Yeah,
Okay.
I raised my hand.
Well, that sounds, sorry, I just can't see everybody, no matter what I do with my
So the
gallery views here. So that sounds sufficient. That sounds like enough to remove that second sentence, if I'm understanding this correctly.
I
Are you
agree.
okay with that?
I think the proposal was to remove the entire standard.
That's not what I heard people just voting for.
I thought that's what we voted for.
So did I, actually.
Okay.
I just can't make sense of what we are trying to say with this. Is Commissioner Wolkin, it's you were making this change. So what is the intent of this?
The intent of my change or the intent of the original standard as written?
Of the original standard.
Oh,
yeah.
well, I can maybe staff should explain that.
What is the?
So the original wording required that buildings would have to use the same colors, materials, and detailing on all elevations, and that those elevations that were more visible or that were visible from public right of way would be allowed to use additional detailing or materials if they wanted to. That was based on community design guidelines, which talks about not allowing one-sided architecture, that they wanted to see architectural elements and materials that went around the entire building. So that's where this came from. That's how staff came up with this language for this. And
I do think it's important that buildings look good all the way around in general. The hard part's writing objective standards. I mean, it's like creative art writing. It's very difficult. Anyway.
See how hard Rachel's had to work on this.
Yeah, poor girl.
Okay, should we try one more straw vote? So let's try to see if I can be a little clearer this time at what we're voting for. So one possibility is we can eliminate the whole item. How many are in favor of that? I see
I'm in
one.
favor.
Sorry, I'm just so sorry, but I can't seem to figure out a way.
This is Deputy Clerk Christian. If you'd like, I can try to help you with the
I see it
straw
now. I
poll.
figured out a better way. I just shrunk the screen way down and now I can see everybody.
So are we recommending that we go back to staff's original wording? Is that what we're voting on?
I believe the vote is deleting this standard altogether,
Okay.
taking all the words away.
If we had this much trouble with it, I'm supportive of deleting it.
You're here.
I like what Rachel said, which was the intent, but I can see how coming in with some drawings, it would seem pretty coercive when I'm doing a wall that's facing a blank other wall and I have to color it and design it so
Right.
it matches all the way around, you know.
So by removing this, we would be negating what the ARC was recommending, right? By removing it all together instead of wordsmithing it. Is that my understanding correct?
But the ARC tried to wordsmith it, didn't they?
So I'm gonna jump in here and say, let's do a poll and let's move on and make a decision on whether this stays or goes. Good news is that we don't have any projects to decide whether this is even necessary yet or not, right? So this is something where we don't know if we need it. And if we need it in the future, we can come back and add something that's more accurate to the situation.
Okay, sounds good.
I agree with that.
So how many are in favor of removing it? You can raise your hands now.
I am.
I am.
Same here.
I'd say we have a majority for sure.
Yeah.
Let's just go for it. We'll remove it for now. And what's the
Bingo.
next?
All right, the next one, this is actually a new objective design standard based on ARC's direction. So staff took a stab at writing this one. So this is not one that the ARC actually reviewed. You guys are the first group reviewing it, but it said all residential units that face, front, or overlook a public, common, or private outdoor space shall be designed with at least one window that provides overlook on the outdoor space. Commissioner Volken proposed that that be replaced with residential buildings shall include windows that overlook outdoor spaces.
I like Commissioner Wilkins' change personally.
Yeah, highly supportive. I think the first version is overly complex.
Rachel, I just have one question. So the mention of public, common, or private outdoor space, was the intent really to overlook private outdoor spaces too?
Yes, they were wanting, and the intent wasn't necessarily that like a neighbor would overlook onto a private, but that residential unit that has that private space should have a window that looks out onto it at least. So to kind of try and cover all of it, this was staff's attempt to try and cover all the bases. But I also like the simplicity of Commissioner Wilkins' recommendation.
I'm agreeable to the simpler language as well then.
Me too.
I agree. Is there any, this looks like we've got a majority now. Anybody want to strongly disagree? Then it's Commissioner Wilkins' language. Good. Accepted.
All right, so the next one is in regards to the private outdoor space. Commissioner Wilken recommended that instead of an or, that an and be inserted, and that 60% of the units have private open space.
Without that mention of the 60% of the units, was the intention that it would be all units would have 65 square feet of private outdoor space?
No, the way that it's currently written is that the developer would have the option to provide private or common open space, depending on the project.
And I wanted to just note disagreement with this. It's more of not necessarily the 60%, but just the removal of the or. I think in terms of objective design standards, I'd want to see more flexibility here. And I think private outdoor space, even on 60%, theoretically could be tough or challenging given the project. And then wanted to also note that the Tax Credit Allocation Committee has design standards as well for required at least private recreational area that's in an outdoor area. That's a common area. And so in my mind, for a traditionally affordable project, this is redundant with those overlapping standards. So I'm not supportive of that change, but I respect what Commissioner Wolkin was trying to do there.
Mm-hmm. I agree with Commissioner Hopkins. Who else would like to chime in real quickly? See if we need to have a vote or straw vote, or
I have a hard time wrapping my head around this one.
I just don't see what it gains.
Can I ask Commissioner Hopkins a question about the Tax Credit Allocation Committee, what that is and what standards they have and how does that work? Is that for affordable housing only?
Yes. So that's the basically the main regulatory agency in terms of design and essentially finance everything. I would be hard pressed to find a single project, major multifamily project in California that's been built in the last 30 years without utilization of the tax credit program. And they have some pretty stringent design guidelines, everything from interior to exterior design guidelines. And specifically for multifamily projects, they'll require open recreational spaces. In a common area, it can be anything from a playground structure to basketball courts. You can meet those open outdoor recreational space in a variety of different ways. And so, but I guess the 100 square feet per unit, I'm just not sure if it would land there exactly with a potentially constrained site.
Do they require private open space?
No, they don't.
Okay. And that just as background, that was a little bit of why that or was put in there, is because staff knows about the requirements for affordable housing, and so that there is that flexibility that's I think needed if you're looking at an affordable project.
So just a thought on this. Every project that would go to the TCAC is going to be 100% affordable and usually would utilize some sort of density bonus, which would afford them concessions or incentives, one of which could be relaxation from the standard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a point well taken, Tyler. In which case, Commissioner Wilkins' idea that generally if projects come in, that at least 60% of the units have private outdoor space sounds like a good one to me.
And I have a question for you very quickly, Tyler. If a developer were getting an exemption in this case, would E1 as an entirety be the exemption erased, or would there be individualized exceptions for the 60% and then also for the 100 square feet, or how would that be interpreted?
I think it can be interpreted probably a couple different ways depending on what the issue is with the project and compliance with the requirement. But I believe that E1 could be eliminated in its entirety in terms of being an incentive or concession.
And just count as one, right?
Correct. Yes. That's how I would read it.
Understood. Thank you.
Ooh.
I personally support the wording change then, and given this clarification, I wonder if Commissioner Hopkins is okay with this.
I appreciate where it's trying to go. I think I just find it the project manager in me is having a tough time getting there. So I think I'll oppose, but I totally support the intent, and in my opinion, it's the open space requirements in this case would already be covered by what's required by TCAC or SIDLAC or HCD.
Right.
I support the change.
So do I.
I support the change.
So
I think we've got sufficient votes to support the change. Let's do it.
Okay.
All right. The next one was a proposal by Commissioner Hopkins regarding the landscaping and reducing the 15% to 10%.
So Rachel, where did the 15% come from originally?
That was my research and looking at other jurisdictions and trying to get an idea of what seemed to be reasonable. I didn't want it to be a hindrance, but I also felt like because these are objective standards, I had to provide very specific quantitative thresholds.
To my mind, 15% isn't very much of outdoor space. It's just a sliver of the entry, common outdoor space, etc.
So when I was looking at this, I was thinking of it in kind of a worst case scenario in terms of open space, a particularly constrained site. And I guess now that we have I guess I would especially advocate for this now that in consideration of what we consider to be landscaping, if we have outdoor recreational area and say it's not a traditional landscape, say it's a basketball court, for example, that the 15% on a constrained site might be harder to reach if you wanted an outdoor recreational area that wouldn't be considered traditional landscaping. I think that I agree with you. I think in the vast majority of projects, 15%, but I'm just thinking of that, trying to think of the worst case scenario and increasing flexibility as I read through these.
And I do want to point out that this does specifically state setbacks. Mm-hmm. So it's not, it's really focused on front and side setback requirements. So if a project site does not have a side or front yard setback requirement, then this wouldn't apply.
Well,
I appreciate
that. Also, the word landscape is a bit ambiguous in that it's hardscape and softscape. So,
yeah, we are adding so this, you'll be seeing the zoning regulations. We're coming forward with some cleanup items and some items dealing with the housing element. And in that is a definition for the landscape because we actually don't have it defined. So that identifies that landscape includes planted areas with live plants.
Oh, I see. But you do have a section on hardscapes.
Yes.
You're going to put a lot of landscape architects out of business. They can't do hardscapes. Okay.
Chair Jorgensen, I have a question. The way I'm reading this standard, it says that all projects shall landscape at least 15 or 10% of the project site. So to me, that's the whole site, not just the setbacks. And also, if I understood correctly, staff said that landscaping just includes plantings. So that wouldn't be mulch and rocks and bark, right?
Well, that would, yeah, I could find the landscape definition. So it's like that planted area. So it is you're not counting just the single plant. It's the mulch and rocks, but anyways, I should find the definition.
So if you had an area that was just rocks, would that count as landscaping?
No.
No, okay. All right, well, maybe you could answer the question about the percent of the project site.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, so you're right. I was misreading this objective design standard. So it is for the entire site, 15%. So I
Okay.
apologize for that misinformation. Okay. But what the standard is clarifying is that the front side, the setbacks are counted towards that, can be used for that landscaping.
Can I ask another question of staff?
Sure. So
would a 10% minimum requirement conflict with anything in the zoning regulations on landscaping?
No.
Okay, thank you.
And I think this is another one of those items that, we could start with 10% and then we see projects come forward and want to see more landscaping. This could be modified to be increased as projects, we see projects come in. So I think this is another example, as Tyler had brought up, with other standards where we could, where it could be changed.
I'd support that. We're into water conservation and so on. And if you say 10%, it's more manageable than 15 if you're thinking about actually growing green stuff and watering it.
I can agree with that too. I was thinking sort of the same thing, Commissioner Daneker.
So where does that leave you, Commissioner Daneker and Commissioner Shoresman?
We support the change. I support the change to 10%.
Correct. I'm agreeable with the change to 10%.
How many would support the 10%? You want to just raise your hands? I can see everybody now. I would do so also. Okay. I think we're there. Good. We are good.
The next one we have is the discussion on a potential in lieu option for offsite tree planting.
This was brought up by Commissioner Hopkins, and I agree with him. If there's a site that's constrained and you got, I don't know, I think offsite in lieu is a good idea.
Thanks, Commissioner. Yeah, and I guess the one of the things that I was thinking of when looking at this is, we don't ever at the Planning Commission see the projects that don't happen because of constraining regulations. And so that's just one thing I wanted to note is in the property evaluation stage, if there wasn't more flexibility here, there could be a lot of projects that are complete non-starters that we never ultimately see on the developer side, just because there's not the ability to potentially move a tree off site. And so I'd propose an in lieu option. And I think, in terms of city goals and carbon emissions, that in lieu option should maybe be at a planting rate higher than a 1-to-1 as an alternative. And like 1.5, 2, is kind of the ballpark of what I was thinking. But that option should be available.
They'd have to supply the property too, because if the city doesn't have a spot, you can just go landscape.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
I think we sort of used that standard for San Luis Ranch when they were taking up agricultural land, as I recall.
Yeah, as a matter, yes.
So, and I think it was at least twice, wasn't it, staff? It came in more than twice, but I think it was minimum of twice the land.
For 71 Palomar, which also removed several trees, it's a much smaller site. They had to plant 2-to-1, and for the trees they could not fit on site. They actually paid into the city's tree funds.
Well, that's a good idea. I like that.
Because
and then the arborist can deal with it.
The tricky thing is if the commission requires an off-site option, not all developers will have another site to plant those trees on.
Right.
Something to consider.
Right.
What about sorry to interrupt here. What about the idea of just street trees in general? I mean, whether it's adjacent to the property frontage, or whether it's somewhere else in the city that needs a street tree, why don't we just open it up to that?
I think the more open, the more flexible, the better. So I'm supportive of that, or payment of in lieu to the arborist fund. But yeah, just allowing the option of flexibility. Yeah.
I support that. I'm in support of the off-site option, the option for an in lieu fee, the option for the street trees at a higher ratio than 1-to-1. So whatever the commission's comfortable, 1.5 to 1, 2 to 1. Also, I think it's important that the location of the planting be to the satisfaction of the appropriate city agency, the community development director or public works or parks or whatever the appropriate agency is for the particular location.
And unfortunately, I don't think we can add that language because it's not objective. They would be a subjective, there would be a subjective element by allowing the public works director or the arborist to make a decision.
Well, I would say do the arborist then. That's just my opinion. I would think the arborist would be a good person to go to. He knows where we need trees and programs and stuff.
But I think Rachel is saying you can't say any of that. You can just
no.
say
She's saying you have. She's saying you have to say which one it is, right?
Oh, I think no one.
Oh, you're saying you can't go to somebody.
Can't get there from here.
Well, what if we say that the location has to be consistent with city goals and policies and standards?
But then the policy or standard might be subjective. So then they go to that thing and they might have, it would not be objective.
I think if you offer a menu where the in lieu option is that they can plant off-site within the city of San Luis Obispo, so they would have to show where that is. They plant street trees in a location that a street tree is required, or they pay an in lieu fee. So those would be the options. I think those are pretty straightforward in terms of being objective. It's very clear, like you plant it off-site within city limits. We can show us where that's going. We can verify that. If they're planting a street tree, they'll have to check in with the arborist to make sure they can plant a street tree in a certain location, or if they pay a fee, that's the other option.
I agree.
Sounds good to me.
And all of those options that you're proposing, other than replacing on-site 1-to-1, would be at a 2-to-1 minimum?
I think that seems reasonable.
Sounds reasonable to me. Yeah.
I agree.
Sounds good.
Okay. I think we have agreement. Staff can wordsmith it.
All right.
Now, did we get to the end?
I think.
Oh,
this is just a typo that Commissioner Mulkin pointed out. So this, I did not delete, do not appear. So thank you for finding that for me.
I saw that too, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're left with the bicycle parking.
Uh-oh.
Yes. So Commissioner Shoresman had a couple comments. I think the first one was about the URACs. I typed this in as we were discussing the item.
How about just, if I could add to that, how about, she said that she wasn't particularly, shouldn't have to be the peak style. So how about short-term racks shall be peak style rack or equivalent? Or does somebody have to decide what?
Is that objective?
Yeah.
What is equivalent?
Right.
Yeah.
That's subjective.
Right.
Never mind.
I think peak style rack is probably, it's pretty common nomenclature for that style of rack.
Yep, I agree.
We use that in other of our documents as well, so it's consistent. But this is pretty straightforward. I'm not sure if Commissioner Shoresman, that gets to what you would like to have.
Yeah, it's much more straightforward than I was rambling around. So appreciate that.
All right, that's good.
And then the other item was in regards to the large style bicycle racks. And I'm not sure what the thoughts are on with that one.
Yeah, and that was, and I don't necessarily think that those larger bikes require special racks. The peak style racks generally work fine. What is probably necessary is enough space to park a larger bike. So I don't know, a longer room. But again, I'm willing to kind of put that on the back burner, you know, and possibly for future edits. I don't know if you keep a list of future possible ideas, that as you're looking at other jurisdictions guidelines, you can, you know, keep an eye out for something like that for a future revision. I would be fine with that.
Definitely. I'm taking notes on all the comments, and, you know, we started with a lot more standards initially. So I'll kind of add this to our notes as we move forward this. I think there'll be more conversations coming.
Good.
The very last item, and I'm not sure if I might be able to get some help from Marky at all, but the very last comment was essentially if these regulations are in conflict with state regulatory guidelines for affordable housing, that there's a deferral to the state requirements.
I'll just weigh in. I think in anticipation of what Tyler was saying earlier, if there's a problem, you know, that can be anticipated at a later time. And there's still density bonus exemptions for things that are in conflict as well. So I'm prepared to walk that back. I hadn't really sat there and take the time to actually compare like line item by line item to all the guidelines I was thinking of. So I think I can drop that for now. And if I do end up seeing any conflict, I can communicate that to staff and we can work through it at that time.
And in that case, don't the state standards trump anyway?
Yes.
So
well, not necessarily for the affordable housing program guidelines. It would be more of the state land use and zoning guidelines. Am I correct in that, Tyler?
Well, I think it's a process issue as well, right? Because projects that are going to TCAC already have gone through a city entitlement process. And so we've already reviewed it, you know, based on our local standards. And so when it gets to the state, you know, there's a different standard there. But I would say that, you know, I don't know if and when or how often that may come up, but I think there are concessions and incentives available to the projects that would qualify for TCAC that could take advantage of, you know, relaxation from those standards. That you mentioned, Commissioner.
Well, yeah, sure thing. I'm just trying to minimize the number of exemptions or maximize the number of exemptions possible for a given site. But I know I totally hear what you're saying there. But I mean, yeah, I think we could cross that bridge when and if we come to it. So I'm prepared to drop that comment right now.
Well, that's it. Those are all of your comments.
I move we adopt the draft resolution recommending the City Council introduce and adopt the ordinance amending Title 17 per the changes we just made.
I second.
My goodness. Are we ready to vote? Kevin,
Yes.
let's vote before anybody has anything else to say.
All the roll call.
Commissioner Khan.
Yes.
Commissioner Dondekar.
Yes.
Commissioner Hopkins.
Yes.
Commissioner Shoresman.
Yes.
Commissioner Wolkin.
Yes.
Vice Chair Quincy.
Yes.
Chair Jorgensen.
Yes. We did it.
Can't we add another item to the agenda?
We really need something. I think we'll just jump right away. We'll close that hearing and we'll move very quickly to Tyler for an update.
All right. Well, thanks, commissioners and chair for getting through that agenda, and I appreciate that. Just looking out in October here, we have first meeting is on the 13th. We have another pretty, I think, interesting and good item here. It's the zoning regulations update. I mentioned this before. So This kind of includes a few different buckets of modifications. One is just general cleanup clarification since we updated it in 2018 that just needs to happen. Second bucket is our housing element implementation items. And these are fairly straightforward items, minor level items that just get us in alignment with state law. And then we also have our airport land use plan changes that need to get our zoning regulations in compliance with the county's updated airport land use plan. So those are the three items that'll be the main focus of the 1013 hearing. That's the only item on the agenda. And then looking out, second meeting in October, October 27th, we have two items currently. And first item is the San Luis Ranch Agricultural Heritage Site. And this is the site and learning center. It consists of about 40,000 square feet of commercial. It includes a variety of activities there, such as farmers market, restaurants, retail, and agricultural processing buildings. Second item on the agenda would be the Bullock Ranch project that's coming back for Planning Commission consideration. This is a 192 residential unit project in the Orchid Area Specific Plan. This one did go through ARC a while back, and then there were some questions about some of the conditions that might be associated with the project. So staff's been working with the applicant on clarifying what those are and what they mean. And so you should see that project back on the 27th of October. So that kind of gets us through October, and then I'll update you on the next hearings after that. We have one meeting in November, just to throw that out there. It's on the 17th. That's the only meeting for the month of November. And then we have one meeting in December, and I don't have that on my calendar, but I believe it's like the second Wednesday of that month. So after October, we got 4 meetings left for the rest of the year.
Second Wednesday looks like the 8th.
Yeah, so that sounds right. So that's our last meeting of the calendar year. So we got four meetings left.
Total.
And then Tyler, as I mentioned to you, at some point when you are able, it would be good to get some update on the new state laws, SB 9 and SB 10 around single family zoning and multiple units on a parcel, that kind of thing. A whole set of things will come up from.
And then also,
when does that become applicable?
January 1st, both of them.
January 1st.
Mm-hmm.
also at some point we want an update on that lady that said that developer came and took trees off her property.
Yes, so we're still working on the Serrano question. We're still getting confirmation with coordination with code enforcement, and we should have an update at the next meeting on that.
Thank you.
Look for that on the October 13th meeting, and then I'm thinking probably the October 27th meeting, we will have an update on SB 9 and SB 10, and we can kind of present, I think, some information, both graphically, and presentation wise on what that looks like for us.
Cool.
Yeah.
That'll be on the 24th, Tyler?
Right now I'm thinking the 27th would be when we anticipate having kind of our analysis complete on what those changes mean for locally for us.
Good, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tyler. Let's adjourn without any more raw.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Okay,
you.
we're adjourned.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thanks.
Thank
for
you, and
sticking
good
with
night,
it.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Okay, take care.